Another FanFest has come, and with it our second look at Final Fantasy XIV Evercold, and all the new things that will have to offer. This time, the amount of story stuff we directly got was a lot smaller than it was in Anaheim, and virtually all of the new information was contained just within the keynote presentation, so I am actually going to go over all of that stuff in this one analysis video, instead of promising other deep dives into certain aspects that end up never coming out because I got sidetracked by rating, because seeing the Evercold announcement made me want to play the game more. I'm giving up my dreams of clearing Kefka on content, and probably delaying that by at least a month because of Occult Crescent and the Xenoblade 2 Switch 2 edition for this, so you better be grateful! And that does mean subscribe, you in the back, I see you. Don't really have much else to say. We're gonna go through the extended trailer, talking about things as they become relevant, and everything I don't talk about while going through that, I'll just go through in order of when it comes up in the keynote. That being said, this will contain spoilers for all the MSQ up through 7.5, as well as likely a good chunk of major side content, and a lot of my own personal opinions and speculation on things. If anything, some of the most interesting parts about this entire FanFest were what they chose not to show off. We didn't get any more evolved demonstrations, we didn't get anything about how they implied they would change up the structure of regular dungeons in addition to the Alliance Raid stuff they mentioned, and we didn't really get any hints on any other returning characters for the story. It really seems like, at least up until the 7.56 patch content is out, they're keeping it really close to their chest what exactly is going on, how we get to the 4th shard, and why we're not bringing a full team of Scions with us. Estinian being one of the main characters of this expansion is not surprising at all, given how long he's been absent from the story so far, and the fact that him not being there is brought up multiple times by people in base 7.5, so obviously him returning is going to herald something that's going to lead into Evercold more, but I'd also at the very least expect both Alphino and Alize to be present if only one of them was. Y'shtola being heavily interested in going with us to another shard, as that could further her goals in returning to the first, Kryl kind of being around in general to show that her being promoted to main cast wasn't a one expansion thing, and I'm fairly certain we do still owe Graha an actual proper full adventure expansion where he's one of our main companions the entire time, but it looks like that's not happening here, either because even the increased budget 14 seems to be getting isn't enough to afford Jonathan Bailey for a full expansion's worth of voice lines, or he's just still too busy for that. Or maybe just having Graha around would invalidate too much of the plot of Evercold, because there are big civilizations around large crystal spires that are almost tower-like structures, and maybe his knowledge of the crystal tower on the first would allow him to interface with those in a way that could shortcut past very big important things we need to do, so he has to stay away so we can have a plot here in the first place. It is possible that there's some very big, almost end-of-post ARR style event that happens in 7.56 that explains why all of this is happening, and will allow them to be a lot more open when it comes to the Tokyo FanFest and the full trailer, or this is just part of the continuing effort to intentionally try to not spoil nearly as much for Evercold as they did for some previous expansions, especially with how unsubtle they were about their teasing with the secrets and Sherlonian heritage found in Dawntrail, as well as just straight up showing Solution 9 off. Like, the fact that we haven't seen the second hub city at all, and only get explicit detail on 2 of the 6 areas in this expansion, is a good sign in terms of them not giving the entire plot away immediately. All this goes to say, the beginning bit of the new trailer is just the exact same as the old trailer. Like, yep, that sure is a depiction of the original Final Days and the Sundering. Hey, that's the Asm Crystal. Hey, that's the key. We know that's called Ethos now. That's a difference. Like, yep, the animation is more polished and prettier, and the music is also more polished and sounds good. But in terms of things that can be gleaned from it, this doesn't really tell us anything even about the new stuff they told us in the FanFest itself. The part I'm most curious about in all this replayed footage is the fact that one of those giant intertwining crystal spires is shown in the tapestry section, while the old woman narrating is talking about how the world used to be before the people of the 4th took to the skies. As we now know that these things, which seem to be very similar to the mother crystals from Final Fantasy XVI, cannot tell you yet if this is an intentional parallel being made between the two games, or if this is simply the same writers using similar concepts again in a different context, but we do know that these are called arc crystals, and based on the name and the way we now know the modern day world of the 4th is laid out, it seems to imply that each of the 5 big elemental ships that we're going to be exploring throughout Evercold has one of these crystals, and that the crystal has something to do with keeping it aloft. And yet, the tapestry is showing people living on the surface, but there is still an arc crystal there. So I'm wondering if this is just simply a discontinuity. The narrator is discussing things about living on the surface, but the tapestry is depicting the building of the ships and people living in the sky. Or if the arc crystals weren't specially built to keep the ships aloft. They were things that existed beforehand that were then put into the ships and used as some sort of power source. Like perhaps they started out basically just functioning in a similar way to the mother crystals from 16, but they were repurposed and their energy is just being consistently siphoned so that the ships could function in the first place. As in, the Flood of Frost started and the people of the Fourth were trying to find a way to survive it, and someone suggested using the arc crystals they already had to make skyships, instead of creating arc crystals because they had a skyship plan to begin with. I do want to say, this little bit of the regular CG style after the tapestry and before showing the gang jumping out of the Asm portal and fighting the flying constructs does support that interpretation of things, as if you look here, the land is pretty close to the base of the crystal, but if you look at the wide shot of the realm ship Naglfar later on in the trailer, you can see that its arc crystal is in the middle of a lake. And considering it is the realm ship of water, and this arc crystal here has a fountain at its base, I would be very surprised if any of the other ship's arc crystals were located in the middle of a lake, which suggests to me that this small clip is either where the arc crystal of water was originally located on the surface, or where it was placed after the realm ships landed after the story of Evercold, because there is a chance the framing device of this trailer is actually in the future after the end of the MSQ of the expansion. More on that very shortly. Now that we know civilization survives on the 5 realm ships, it's a lot more interesting seeing the characters fighting on regular floating sky islands like the ones you would see in the Sea of Clouds in Kurthus back on the Source. Especially because these flying constructs they're fighting have a light blue glow very similar to that always used for the element of water throughout all of 14. If we look later in the trailer though, we'll see Meteor and the new Rogadin guy demonstrating the Bastion job fighting the exact same things, but their lights are the color of fire ether. And in that case, they're on the Fire Realm ship, and are soon approached by one of the giant Titan things that has the same color as fire ether. Just based on stuff from the first FanFest, we were pretty easily able to glean that there are going to be 5 of these Titans, one representing each of the 6 elements besides ice, as ice is just the entire surface of the Fourth. But now that we know that there's also going to be 5 realm ships, one for each of those elements, and we can see that these constructs can take on different colors representing different elements, these things might actually be some sort of automated defense system or white blood cell-like things let out by the Titans themselves, and not some kind of construct directly made by people, though I'm sure the Titans were most likely created in some sort of arcane ritual in the distant past to try and stop the Flood of Frost from taking over the surface in the first place. Which is of course primarily because we see people on the fire ship being attacked by the fire-colored ones, and then the fire-colored Titan shows up. Like, if you told me that, okay, each of the ships have these automated defense drones that they make, and they use the same element that each ship is associated with, that would make perfect sense to me. But since the fire guys are attacking the fire ship, this isn't a case of the portal being detected by some people on Naglfar, so they send out their water-elemented drones to go investigate, and those start attacking. It seems to be more of a case that these things are the Goombas of whatever the proper antagonistic faction being faced by the people of the Fourth is. By that, I don't mean that this has anything directly to do with the Winterer plan that we're going to the Fourth to stop. I mean that this is the big element-associated problem that is threatening daily life on the Shard, similar to Sin Eaters on the First, getting eaten on the 13th, and getting electrocuted on the 9th. Now yes, the frozen surface is the real calamity in the sense that the Fourth was pretty clearly being set up to be used for a second calamity of ice if that ever needed to happen. But I'm guessing that the Titans, and all this other elemental imbalance, and all the other elements being used for the realm ships, is some function of how the people tried to fight against that calamity, possibly gathering up all of the ether of the other elements before it could be overrun by the ice or whatever. The Titans are like some kind of living resource of each of those elements of ether, and basically contains most of what's left on the surface of the Fourth, which are being siphoned away by the arc crystals, and that's why they keep attacking the ships, or something along those lines, perhaps. We don't really know exactly how the etheric imbalance of the Fourth was messed with, because we don't really know what the Ascians did to it in the first place. The only shard we know for sure they tried to teach people primal summoning on was the 13th, and that was their first try where they screwed up the rejoining entirely. So it is possible that in order to induce imbalances, primal summoning is actually only useful on the source side of things, just in terms of gathering enough ether in the right place, and they have to employ other methods on the shards. We're fairly certain they didn't do it on the first, and it's almost entirely certain that they just simply used Electrope on the ninth. So some different method other than primals, resulting in different kinds of giant titanic semi-divine creatures that have a lot of ether, would make sense for a different shard. We also don't know if Helmerut herself was responsible for any of the meddling on the fourth prior to her winter days, so she might not even know what was going on either, and we'd have to consult ancient records or gain the memories of our past incarnation from this shard to find out either. Like, Helmerut seems to be somewhat willing to divulge information that doesn't just make it completely trivial to stop her, so she could do the Emmett thing and just pop up periodically throughout the story of Evercold, giving more tidbits and explaining why certain things are the way they are, and she could very equally likely just not know. Also, no idea who'd be doing the narration for this expansion, but I think it would be very funny if it was Calyx. Like, you'd think Emmett narrating Endwalker would be the most unenthused narrator any of these expansions have ever had, but that seems to be specifically Emmett watching everything going on from the Ethereal Sea after dying. So he's not tired of being alive unsundered Ascian mode, he has the slight bit of whimsy he had back in Elpis back, which means he isn't as detached as you'd think he'd be, but Calyx being the narrator? The guy who is explicitly on our side in Evercold because he hates his coworker on the fourth more? That would be peak comedy. The other thing that's still very interesting about this is the fact that Meteor pops out of the portal with his Viper outfit from Dawntrail on. Now, we're not strangers to him changing jobs from the previous expansion's poster one to the current expansion's one during a trailer. It happened in Shadowbringers and probably more importantly Heavensward, and this could just be another deliberate parallel, along with having Alphino and Estinian be the other main characters for a Cold and Norse-themed expansion. But there is always the possibility that we do make multiple trips to the fourth at some point throughout the MSQ, possibly involving large time skips because of the sliding timescale between shards. Like, yeah, I'm always on team allow time in the source to pass finally, including aging up the twins. But, like, if everyone accidentally gets transported to the fourth physically instead of spiritually, like Raha brought them to the first, and in doing so, we're only able to successfully bring Estinian and Alphino back, then we go into the fourth again and a lot of time has passed, and we get one of the twins having aged while the other one is still the same. That is also a lot of interesting character stuff you can mine. But at the same time, if there's going to be a lot more other Scions directly involved in the main plot in this, I feel like they just show off at least some of them and only hide Alizé, because like, if you time skip 4 years ahead, where Alizé's clearly an adult, Thancred and Urianger are not going to visibly change in any meaningful way, and like, they do age up Meteor by a couple years each expansion, even if canonically a couple years haven't passed, so you could just argue they were doing that for those guys too. It's a possibility, but I don't think it's a particularly big one, because they would have obfuscated something like that in a different way if that's intentionally what they were hiding. Given that we're going to have the choice to do any of 3 major areas in any order, and traditionally branching the MSQ means splitting the party and each questline is associated with certain companions you have, we're most likely going to have at least one more person with us, whether that is someone else coming from the source or someone native to the fourth, I don't know. But either way, I think it is more likely we're bringing Estinian and Alphino as the main, more established characters, and then most of the rest of our party is going to be either new characters or returning characters they don't want to show off yet, because doing so would be a spoiler for 7.56. The Bastion reveal is soft confirmation that one of the Scions is not going to be job changing to that, but every expansion since Stormblood has had one of the Scions job change to one of the new jobs introduced in it, so they definitely wouldn't be showing us the full party roster until they're allowed to show us who's becoming the new Fizz Ranged. Like, whether it's an existing Scion, major or minor, becoming the new Fizz Ranged, or if they're bringing Fordola back and giving her Guts' auto crossbow and hand cannon, at the way they're holding back story info, that's not going to be something we're going to want to show in a trailer first, and are going to let us find out at least the basics of in the MSQ itself. Another thing to back up my Arc Crystal theory, by the way, is this small clip of a flower withering, because that shows that the regular CG style and not the tapestry style is being used for scenes of the frost encroaching, and therefore pre-Sky era for the fourth. So flashbacks aren't limited to the tapestry style, meaning the Arc Crystal shot from before could also be one. After the line about fleeing to the skies though, we get the biggest drop of actual new stuff in the entire updated trailer. A new character that they actually almost told us something about already. And yes, I am kind of comedically overselling it, because we didn't get a short bio about her, all we got is her name, that being Visna. That is the name of a shield maiden who appears in Norse mythology, and also in several Nordic languages means to either wilt or wither. So, very, very appropriate name in multiple senses for what's going on in the plot of this expansion. But yes, that and the fact that she is going to be a major character in Evercold are the only pieces of information we are given on her. But thankfully, there is a bit more I can say about her other than, well, looks like Medion is getting a new sister this expansion. The first is that her name, in addition to just being fitting for the context and the setting, could also indicate a little bit more into her role. As in, if her name has to do with some kind of withering, she may be the Winterer representative on the 4th that we were warned about. And if this is true, considering she's clearly presented in a positive light here, she may be misleading us throughout much of the expansion, allowing us to play into her hands and further her plan, only for us to turn around and have to actually stop her later. There are two things that give me pause with this. The first is that we're given a clearly antagonistic looking guy in the Odin Aura later on in the trailer, who was also in the previous one, and the second is that, alright, if the Winterers on both the 9th and the 4th were children, then it doesn't really make them look like this big, intimidating, overarching villain organization. It just looks like Halmrit found the smartest yet most easily manipulable kids across the shards, and is giving them all the resources they want to do their fun science experiments in a way that allows the rejoinings to happen the way she wants, which doesn't seem very congruent with her character as it is. The other thing is that an older Visna is by far the most likely character to be the identity of the hooded storyteller woman in the framing device of the trailer. She's using some kind of wand with elemental water magic as a kid, and the old storyteller does use fire magic to light an oil lamp. Plus, if you look at the fur on their tails, they are virtually the same color. So it seems to me that the actual framing device of the trailer is an older Visna talking about the history of the 4th and how the Warrior of Light and their companions showed up to save it. This time giving them the title that it seems like we're going to be going under throughout this entire Godless Realm saga, Far Wanderer. If this is true, this probably does put a pretty big bullet in my Calyx narrator theory, because obviously if the trailer is using a framing device of her passing down the story of Evercold as an oral tradition like the Old Norse sagas used to be, then yeah, the older Visna is probably also going to be the narrator of the expansion too. And it's just going to be another Heavensward parallel, as all of the area narrations in that expansion were legitimately diegetic writings. They just came from the future, one that we most likely haven't reached yet, as they are passages from Count Fortomp's memoir of the events of the expansion, which was also called Heavensward. So while the cutscenes themselves might not include the framing device of the elderly Visna telling a story to some young Aura kid, it is likely the old version of her is going to be narrating all of the area intros, and we're going to learn, or at least see, a flash forward to the future of the older version of her as a storyteller. And there is a very small chance that they're going to manage to pull off a big time skip on one of the shards properly and have us return to the 4th after a patch or so and have like 60 so years have passed, though I think that's extremely unlikely. Like, yeah, if during the MSQ we solve the issue with the surface being frozen and we allow all the realm ships to land so we can still explore all the same areas, they're just on the ground so the skyboxes change, yeah, that's fine. But I can't see them updating literally every NPC to account for multiple decades of history to have passed. It really seems like as soon as a shard is connected more strongly to the source, the timescale really just mostly evens out. Like, the 1st has been dead even with the source ever since we first got there. As soon as Vanguard got opened up, it seems like all of the 9th, not just the part that was merged with the Asulani, got evened out with the source, and because Void Gates, it seems like the 13th were just kind of always in tune with the source, and things were only wacky because you were effectively immortal there as Void Sent. So, I think the 4th is likely not going to have very big fluctuations once we're properly there, at least at the beginning of Evercold. If we end up dipping in there at some point during 5-6, then maybe something big will happen. But I can't see, once we actually get to explore the regular explorable overworld areas, any sort of big time shift to happen. Oh, and also she may be somewhat hiding the Fizz range job, which is crazy because we haven't even gotten to the part of the trailer with Bastion in it yet. And that's because the new leading theory for the job is a Falconer, or some kind of Ranger type job that has a bird as part of its toolkit. Now, Ranger is an existing job, so it's not going to be called that. And presumably, unless the bird itself is some kind of automaton, the actual weapon is going to be the glove the bird sits on, or the character holding a regular weapon like a crossbow or something in their other hand, and just wearing a glove for the bird as well. So maybe part of their toolkit has to do with weapon attacks, and then the bird also like flies in and you can command it using OGCDs or something like that. I doubt it would be a proper pet job because they've removed basically all pet interaction from Summoner and Scholar like 3 expansions ago. And considering having a proper pet job back as Beastmaster was enough to be considered a limited job, I doubt you're going to be making much use of the pet hotbar, but I think the fantasy of fighting with a bird and just having an actual flesh and blood animal alongside you as opposed to the etherical constructs and void scent that you can get in any other job that sort of has you with a companion is going to be novel enough, assuming the actual job design is also unique and separates it from the 3 existing Fizz ranges. Now, besides there being a bird here, why do people think that? Well, we did not get a Yoshi P shirt tease from this FanFest. As far as anyone can tell so far, unless Guess Who's Back was hinting at Boomerang as being the weapon type for the Fizz ranged, the Ridditin shirt from the last FanFest was just hinting at Bastion. And since we did not get a Yoshi P shirt at all, our only hinting towards the Fizz range job was in the development panel, which focused around the game's sound design, and ended with an audience participation quiz where they were supposed to guess specific sound effects. But the last 2 ones were a debate, because they are not sound effects that exist in the game already. There was a joke about Soken having secretly slipped in 2 sound effects from the upcoming Fizz range job, and then after that he gets jokingly dragged off the stage by security for doing that. But this is supposed to be our big hint. And well, I think you should just listen to the 2 sound effects.
Anyone know that one?
すげえな、誰もいないね。
Doesn't look like anyone knows that one.
OK。じゃあもう1個行ってみよう。もう1個の方どうぞ。
The second one.
And yeah, that certainly sounds like, at the very least, there's going to be a bird theme to the attacks of this new job, and considering Dancer already has a feather gauge, it's gonna have to be even more bird than that, so actually having a bird just makes sense. The other thing is, it seems like the bird doesn't really belong to Visna at all, so I doubt she is actually going to be the representative of that job. Her outfit and the fact that she's tinkering with a wand-like thing seem to suggest that she is an artificer-type character, as opposed to, like, a frontline combatant fighter, and also, like, she is a child. Based on her design here in the CG, she's just going to use the same base Makote child model they've been using since Heavensward, and that always came off to me as younger than, like, the child Hyur and Elezen base models they have, which they also use for Reen and the twins, and it seems like Reen at 15-ish is the youngest they want to have a character actually be a combatant, so I think she's going to be in somewhat closer to an Erenville and Dawntrail role than anything like that, and we're going to have other characters we meet do the fighting. Plus, like, the bird is bothering her. It causes the water rune thing to activate from her wand, and she even says stop and shoos it away before it flies off. We use the bird flying away to cut to a different scene on a different realm ship, but I would not be surprised at all if this scene continues in the full version of the trailer, and we see the bird fly onto the arm of the character who is actually representing the new job, which based on existing trends is actually going to be a returning character we've seen before having changed into that job. Now, I don't really have a good guess as for who it could be. Maybe this is why they're hiding Alize and she's doing the bird thing now. But also, in the Stormblood trailer, Yugiri does have a bird. So if they finally recast her in Japanese and want to bring the character back, which is something a lot of people have been hoping for a long time, this would be a pretty neat way to do it, especially because this is a very aura heavy expansion even without that. I don't really know what this symbol could actually mean, but it looks to be made out of water ether, so there is possibly some sort of connection to all of the ships being associated with a different element. Maybe the wand will accidentally call the water element Titan and that will cause us to fight it or something. Or it could just be representative of something we haven't learned about plot-wise. Another thing people have brought up is Final Fantasy XIII parallels, as Vista's outfit is somewhat reminiscent of Hope, and, well, the bird kind of has Lightning's color scheme, so that, combined with the whole living in the sky and the ground being messed up thing, could indicate that Evercold, or perhaps the Godless Realm saga as a whole, is going to contain more parallels to that game the further we go. Considering it is its own trilogy in and of itself, and was so recent when 14 started that it didn't really get a lot of shoutouts and only got the one old crossover quest and now some Mog Station items, does kind of make sense, especially because one of the pre-order bonuses is an FF13 mount, and we were kind of hypothesizing prior to this that, oh, we're doing environmental stuff, this would be a great place to include FF7 references. And then they're just putting an ad for FF7 Revelation in the game instead of that, so they're going to have to use another game for homage instead. As the bird flies away, we get a closer look at the big snake building that was shown off in concept art last FanFest, as well as a full wide shot of the entire Naglfar ship, which was the first confirmation that a lot of the areas in Evercold were going to be big sky ships and not just regular sky islands, which I think that was cool. They talked about everyone in the 4th living in the sky and showed the clip of the gang fighting on regular looking Sea of Clouds sky islands previously, but they held the revelation about the ships until this FanFest, which is arguably one of the biggest plot details, possibly more important than even Visna. Anyway though, we now find ourselves on a second realm ship. The Empire of Mor Ardain, Hringhorny, the realm ship of fire. We don't know the names of any of the other ships, but this is a very good time to point out that both names we do know are in fact of ships that show up in Norse mythology. Hringhorny was a great ship that served as Baldur's funeral pyre, so makes sense to be the fire one. And Naglfar is the name of a ship made entirely of fingernails and toenails of the dead that carries monsters to the battlefield in Ragnarok, so a little bit less fitting for water, but perhaps the realm of water is going to have a much darker secret behind it, and we're going to find that out at some point that will make the name more fitting. Like, if slave labor was used to build the realm ships, and it ended up with certain people being left on the surface or something like that. Or just literally, if you go below decks, you'll see that conditions for most people on the 4th are actually much worse. That kind of thing. And you know what? In addition to the design being reminiscent of Mor Ardain, which is cool, so I'm going to think this is cool, I gotta give a lot of props to the designers. They made an industrial steampunk-esque city in a Norse-themed Final Fantasy game without making it look derivative of Midgar from FF7 in any way other than both being round, which is fine because part of the name Hringhorny means circle, so it's actually just a reference to the mythological name and not that. So it's cool to see them be effectively 100% original in something where it would have been much, much easier to just directly ape another Final Fantasy game. Oh, right, okay, so they kind of had to do that, got it. I mentioned it a few times, but we got some citizens running away from a fire version of the water guys that the party was fighting earlier, where the Bastion guy and Meteor are teaming up to fight them off and protect the people. We get a decent view of the crowd here, so I think it's a good time to look over who we can actually see. In a few frames, you can also see a crowd of people outside in Naglfar, and there it looks like Hyr, Elizin, and Mikote can be spotted, while here it looks to be exclusively Hyr and Rogadin, unless I'm missing some Elizin ears. So it looks like Hyr are once again going to be the most populous race and can be found just about everywhere, but a lot of the other playable races can be found in more specific areas, such as Mikote being on Naglfar, and Rogadin being native to Hringhorny, which is kind of interesting because, Rogadin are usually associated with the sea on the source, while here they're associated with fire, so if they're shifting around the kind of elemental association of the different races, that would be a neat way to put a spin on things rather than just having to invent so many new races. Considering there are 3 ships we've yet to see at all, I'm going to guess most, if not all, of the other playable races will show up. Like put Hrothgar with wind and Viera with lightning or something like that, or whatever different name each of the races goes by on the first. But I'm going to guess if anyone sits out this expansion, it's going to be Lalafell. Purely because they've been on every shard we've been to except the 13th, and the 13th got messed up so early on, it seems like life didn't really get a chance to evolve into any races other than here to begin with. Plus the only new race we know of is the Kotter, which are Lalafell-sized cats that already use a lot of the clothing aesthetic the dwarves on the first used, so I could easily just see there not being Lalas here, and they're going to do the typical, oh, guess what, you can't go in these buildings unless you're a Lala thing, but with Kotter dwellings instead. Although they are cat people, and Mikote are already here, so maybe they replace Hrothgar instead, I don't know. Anyway, new Rogadin guy, he looks cool. Bastion, that looks cool. Gonna be real, dual shield was, to me, the least interesting possibility for what the shirt could mean for the new job. And the way they executed, I think is the best possible way to do so. It wasn't even necessarily the way it showed up in the trailer here, but when they got to the animation demonstration, as soon as I saw it rotate from claw mode to gun mode, I was completely sold on it. But what about this guy here, though? Is he going to be an actual character in the expansion, or is he just a cool-looking guy they invented to show off the way the job looks since it's not the poster job of the expansion? Well, I am leaning towards him being an actual character, and that is for a few reasons. The first is, he does have a fairly unique-looking design. He's not remotely similar to just default male Rogadin appearance, if you just went straight into the character creator on that. I'm not 100% certain, but I think that hair color combination and possibly that scar placement as well as the facial details are not all available on the same face currently. So in order to make this character in the character creator, you would need to wait for the character creator upgrades in 8.0. So this could be a subtle advertisement for that. And then also, he is not wearing the artifact armor. The only other time one of the new jobs was shown off in one of these trailers, and it was not on an existing named character. It was just completely generic female Viera woman wearing undyed artifact armor, being a dancer, and was shown as part of a flyby through the Crystarium during Shadowbringers. This guy is as much a focus of this scene as Meteor is, shows up first, actually does damage to the enemies before the Reaper stuff happens, and he's not wearing the artifact armor. He's wearing an outfit we've actually never seen. So, not only does this kind of look like a more ordained military uniform, but also, this could just be a uniform indicating that he's some important military or defense figure for the city on Ringhorny. Like, this guy kind of looks like he just is the Raubon of the 4th, which is neat, because with Raubon out of focus for so long, we haven't really gotten this archetype of character in a really long time. So, if he ends up becoming important, I would be 100% there for that. I'm going to do a very brief run-through of the actual Bastion job action in-game trailer, so I'm not going to talk about much else with the job now. So the only other noteworthy thing I have to say about this part of the trailer, other than, yep, Bastion and Reaper are sure cool looking, is that this part very heavily seems to indicate that Harvest Moon is going to remain an ability for Evolved Mode Reaper, though I wouldn't be surprised if the way you get Soul So is different in that version, and a different button, probably Harp, turns into it, based on how Dragoon's Wormund Thrust was turned into a GCG ability, and Piercing Talon turns into it when you have the proc. At the very end of the Enshroud segment, we see Meteor cut down this thing, which appears to be the same type of thing as the smaller drone guys, but bigger, and it does also have the same fire-colored glow on it. So it looks like the big Titan guys are going to summon different levels of creatures, and I was correct that the other ones with the Goombas, these are slightly bigger, and it's likely that we're going to see reskins of pre-existing enemy skeletons with this kind of stone runic glowing pattern on them as dungeon bosses and the like. Then, in the last shot brand new to this trailer, the entire Fire Titan itself shows up, and we can see that it is basically the size of the entire Ringhorny realm ship on its own. Now, I've been calling these creatures Titans because Evercold has a lot of superficial similarities to Xenoblade 2, and I'm making a reference to that. Also, it's just kind of weird to see a big humanoid creature next to something that looks like the city of Albacavanic, because the city of Albacavanic was on a big humanoid Titan in that game. But while Xenoblade 2 used a lot of different cultures and mythologies as names for things in its world, it seems like basically everything in the 4th is going to be named after something Norse, so they're most likely going to be called the 5 Jotnar instead, and each one is going to have the name of a Jotun from Norse mythology that is named something vaguely relevant to its element, which of course makes me think that this one is going to be named Surtur. This would most likely mean the water one associated with Naglfar is named Ire, and it's probably relatively easy to guess the other 3, but I don't feel like doing that when we haven't even gotten names for the ships yet. The fact that at least one of these giant entities is attacking civilization suggests to me that they are going to be considered a major antagonistic force, at least until a plot twist later on in the story, which has me extremely excited because just imagine a Shadow of the Colossus style trial where you're actually attacking different parts of this thing's body, dealing with mechanics, getting an ad phase as they keep summoning drones, and then ending off on, like, maybe the Asm Crystal platform in front of the big giant center chest crystal thing, having to destroy that for your final push. Like, they could do Bismarck, but really, really good. It's been long enough. That would be another Heavensward parallel. Why not do that? I am kind of wondering if we're not going to directly defeat all of them in gameplay if defeating all of them ends up being a goal. Like, yes, almost certainly one of them is going to be a trial, but given the scale, I wouldn't be surprised if, unlike the Light Wardens in Shadowbringers, they're not all going to be dungeon or trial bosses, and instead, some of them are just going to be taken out in cutscenes, and like, maybe you go through a dungeon to get materials to build a giant cannon on Ringhorny, and then you fly that next to the Earth ship, and use the big cannon to shoot through the crystal on the Earth Jotun and take it out that way instead of directly in a fight. Because while it would be cool to do a Shadow of the Colossus style trial, and I also think another really neat idea would be a dungeon where you go through the body of one of the Jotnar, especially since they do seem like they could still be constructs of some sort, I could see it being hard to make sure all 5 fights are completely distinct and aren't just doing the exact same fighting a big giant guy, but with a different element skin on it. The rest of the trailer is just touched up bits from the original one. We got the Odinora, we got the Priestess Woman, we got more dialogue, we got more tapestry, and we got Meteor descending from the sky on an airship as Reaper. And this is where things are a little interesting, because we have Meteor, Alphino, and Estinian jumping out of an Asm Crystal portal on a sunny day while Meteor is wearing his Dawntrail Viper artifact gear still. But then we have another scene of him descending from the sky on an airship in a lightningy snowstorm as a Reaper. So this is another potential hint that we will be traveling to the 4th on 2 different occasions. Now, no matter how much time passes in between them, the first one is not going to be before the fall, because Calyx already confirmed that people are living in the sky when we talked to him last patch, but them not showing the impetus behind Meteor's job change here makes me think there could actually be a story reason in the continuity of the trailer for it. Now, of course, the trailers don't always show everything in chronological order. The Dawn Trail one showed Meteor fighting Galul Jaja after he was on the ship to Tuliolal, and then the end of the trailer was also on the ship to Tuliolal. So this might not mean anything for the story, but he was also in the Viper artifact gear the entire trailer, while he does switch jobs at some point during this one. Is this just another Heavensward parallel? Maybe. But there could also just be something connected to the story that would, in the context of the trailer, lead to a job change that we just don't know about because we don't really know exactly what our goal during Evercold is going to be yet. The last important thing about the trailer itself is something I'm sure you could see in the original, and that is the Japanese subtitles for the title Far Wanderer. The kanji used here mean searcher, pursuer, or seeker, but the furigana indicates that the correct pronunciation is the English word wanderer. In this case, though, the kanji is actually to explain what the furigana means, because the English word wanderer also shows up in the Japanese title of Evercold. So yes, the title Far Wanderer in English is the English word wanderer in Japanese, so they're including kanji here so Japanese speakers who don't know what the word means can understand. Alright, well that was a good 35 minutes on the trailer. Now for the rest of the 2-hour-long keynote. Considering a lot of things were repeated from last FanFest, teasing next FanFest, and spoken in multiple languages requiring translation, we're going to go through this at a much more rapid pace, but we're still going to be here a while, I think. My first commentary is, yes, it is very cool that Yoshi P does still cosplay the new jobs every FanFest. Also, why did they not give him, like, an internal cooling suit, like heavy cosplays and some stunt outfits use? He was dying this entire time. Like, how many bottles of water did he go through? I'm not going frame by frame through it to see how many different bottles Koji opens and gives to him throughout the presentation, but good lord. Also, everyone is happy that we're getting Barrett's gun as a fashion accessory. We should be able to get the little fan he used as one too. I'm just saying. That would be a fantastic Moonfire Fair reward in addition to whatever Extremes themed thing I'm sure we're getting this year. Something sinister lurked. Being over a screenshot of Visna in the overview at the beginning of the keynote could indicate that she's the Winterer, I guess, but I don't think that really matters. I mean, like, together is over a picture of enshrouded Meteor reaching out towards the screen, and like, that I'm sure exists just so I can Photoshop "do you want to take ibuprofen" above that, so I'm not quite sure how much these screenshot choices matter for the story. First thing of substance is the Bastion action trailer. Now, for some reason the icon for the job isn't finished, but we get to see several of its animations, as well as the artifact armor. I think it looks pretty neat. It keeps the Norse aesthetic while also being wildly different from Warrior and Norse-themed jobs in other Final Fantasy games. Plus, it does in fact have a helmet with wings on it, which means I'm going to need to get every set of artifact armor with a helmet with wings on it, such as the Curse of a Hyantia-themed Elezen player. It is impossible to tell what all of these animations are for, of course, because no job action trailer actually uses them in a coherent rotation, as in both the Endwalker and Dawn Trail trailers for Dragoon used Stardiver as if it were a GCD you needed to charge up by elusive jumping away from the enemy with, when it's not even becoming a GCD at all until Evolved Mode. So I can't really tell exactly what all of these animations are going to be for, but we could pretty clearly see a melee 3-hit combo, some kind of secondary melee 3-hit combo, as well as what appears to be a ranged 3-hit combo. Just this much is not particularly surprising, of course, as Bastion is going into the new main tank sub-role alongside the evolved version of Paladin, and because it seems like fight design and the new flexibility of evolved jobs implies that there are going to be times where you're going to need to disengage from melee or move bosses around more, it makes sense for the main tanks who are going to be expected to hold aggro more frequently in high-end content to have a ranged phase that will allow you to disengage from the boss and pull it further distances without having to run back in to get your next GCD in. In Paladin's case, every 40 seconds built up a stack that could be spent on Imperator, which would then give you one use of the regular blade combo they already have, so I wouldn't be surprised if something very similar also exists for Bastion here. The thing that's most surprising though is two seemingly melee 3-hit GCD combos, and that's because Paladin has actually lost their second 3-hit combo in Evolved Mode. They do not have the Atonement combo anymore, and instead, executing the third hit of the regular 3-hit combo gives you one use of Expiation as an OGCD, as well as a single-use magic GC debuff that can be spent on the new action that combines Holy Spirit and Clemency. It's possible then that Bastion also just has one regular 3-hit combo and one 3-hit combo that needs to be built up to, but instead of just having one be melee and one ranged like Paladin does, you can actually stance switch between a claw stance and a gun stance, and all of your GCD actions change based on which stance you are. This, when combined with the fact that tank stance appears to be a buff granted temporarily by Provoke, could indicate that something resembling stance dancing or less trivial aggro management has been returned to the game in Evolved mode, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the aggro generation from Provoke, any AoE abilities, or the ranged pulling attack is just so high, no DPS or healer will ever take it back while a tank is alive. The obvious gap closer animation highly suggests that it does damage, which is surprising because, again, Paladin got a new gap closer that does not have potency on it in Evolved. So another way to look at it would potentially be, Bastion can just fully disengage and have a proper ranged phase using GCDs, even if the potency is less, and as such, their gap closer actually does damage because they don't necessarily need to use it to gap close as often as Paladin would. While Warrior is the only soon-to-be off-tank that actually still has damage on its gap closer, so I wouldn't be surprised if it keeps that, just because it became a unique thing about it by default because everyone else got it taken away. Aesthetically, I think making all the bullets light blue rune themed goes a long way to make this job more interesting a use of the concept than I thought it would be, especially because if they wanted to make a Norse themed tank, I had my hopes out for a rune magic themed version of Magic Knight or Spellfencer, so this is actually pretty close to that while still being a 14 original thing. At the beginning of the clip, we see what I'm assuming is the short cooldown animation, and then after using the range 3 GCD combo, we see what I'm assuming is going to be the 40% mitigation button. Probably also relevant that we never actually see the enemy attack at all during these clips, which isn't surprising at all for a tank. They usually only have that happen during healer trailers, but this does seem to indicate that Bastion will not have the sort of counterattack play that Evolved Paladin does, so it must have a unique gimmick that lies somewhere else. This is actually kind of a good sign because I was somewhat worried that both main tanks having shields would just mean they'd both get the same parrying thing, and then like a warrior versus paladin level difference in how their GCDs work, and that would be the main difference between them, and have one extra targeted cooldown while off tanks might have one extra party cooldown and one extra DPS cooldown or something. But it seems like it might be a bit bigger than that. Though I wouldn't know because they didn't show off a single other Evolved job during this entire FanFest, and it seems to imply that it would be a 4-hour live letter were they to do so they're looking for a way to do it, ? I don't know. Feel like that would be a pretty good use of one of the 6 live letters in between the last piece of 7.x content and Evercold that isn't the Tokyo FanFest, or just periodically drop trailers for 3 jobs or 1 roll's worth of job at the same time on YouTube or something. Give us something to try and examine anything about these before the media tour, because I'm gonna be real with you, the amount of time content creators, many of whom are not hardcore raiders who understand the ins and outs of every single job in the game, have historically been given during media tours to understand the new jobs and their job changes, while also exploring the new areas, running a dungeon, and stuff like that, is not going to be anywhere near enough time to properly explore 23 new Evolved jobs, so there needs to be some kind of ultra preliminary job action guide released a week after Tokyo FanFest to give people a lot of time to try and dissect this, and a wider amount of people to give critiques on how this stuff works, before the very small slice of the general public that is media tour invitees get a chance to maybe look at 2 or 3 of them in depth in the time they're allotted, and then everyone else just kind of has to deal with the results of all of that when the game itself comes out. I couldn't tell you at all what this shoot the ground and make things erupt underneath the enemy ability is supposed to be used for. I'm pretty sure it is an OGCD that does damage to the target and enemies around it, but that is just a guess. We don't see the just generic ranged pulling attack anywhere in here, so it is possible that it's just context sensitive on another button that we do see, like how Shield Bash and Shield Lob have been combined in Paladin. Or it could just not have one because maybe you can just use the regular ranged GCD combo from anywhere, so the optimal way to pull on this job would just be use Provoke to get your tank stance up, and start with one ranged combo while you allow the boss or enemies to move into position, then move to melee, assuming that does more damage. The idea of there being 2 shields and possibly being a proper stance dancer could also make this somewhat of an opposite red mage, where you have to build up power in one weapon by using the other weapon's combo, and then you either have to be close by to use the empowered melee attack, or actually be a certain distance from the enemy, sort of like how Wormwind Thrust works in PvP, in order to get the most damage out of the ranged combo. And like the one big unified thing they showed off with every evolve job so far was that they have a resource that fills up on a 20-second timer. With Paladin, it was uses of Holy Sheltron. With White Mage, it was Lilies. With Bard, it was singing a song. And with Dragoon, it was charges of the new high jump, which is somehow both Kaiten and True North. In this case, it could be that whenever you get a new stack of this buff, it empowers the mode of the weapon you're not using right now. So say if you're in melee and it ticks over to another stack after 20 seconds pass, maybe that could buff your next ranged combo instead, so you have to pick and choose when to be in which mode in order to think about what's going to happen later on in the fight, and like when you want the buffed range combo, so that you can set up having your ranged combo be in its empowered state when you actually do need to disengage and use that instead of the melee one. Probably just overthinking it. Also, this attack that looks a lot like it's going to have a cast bar, so I don't know, maybe Bastion will have its own version of Numa or something. Does look pretty cool too. And yep, Bastion starting in Limsa. That makes sense because it's a Rogadin thing, but also it's starting in Limsa, which means the Fizz range is probably not starting in Limsa, so rip the Musketeer Guild ever being used for something dream. Next chance we're going to get is probably the next Fizz ranged, so I guess see you in Tokyo FanFest 2035 when they reveal the Fizz range for 11.0, and we'll see if we get lucky finally. Lore-wise, it comes from Airslant, like basically everyone who expected a Nordic-themed tank said it would be. No, Raider's Axe can penetrate a Bastion's Skiltborg, so I guess we're power-scaling tanks, and Warrior is just weaker than Bastion. I guess main tank has higher defenses than off-tank, but if Warrior was a DPS, maybe they could get through. I don't know. Then the final bullet point on the slide mentions that the Skiltborg can offer protection for wielders and their allies in terms of defensive and curative boons, which Koji specifically says are defensive and healing spells. So it is again possible that we're going to get actual magic use in addition to the just etherically charged bullets a la Gunbreaker that we've already seen, and it does sort of seem like there's going to be an actual heal button similar to Clemency. Yeah, it is probably very doomer to just kind of assume that Bastion and Paladin are going to have equivalent buttons for everything when they're supposed to be making jobs more unique, but that's kind of the only thing I can take out of this. Like, it's going to have a defensive spell, a curative spell. Now, maybe this is just a figure of speech and a function of translation, and it's going to have something closer to a version of Gunbreaker's Aurora, but it's just a raw healing number instead of a regen, which would work, of course, on both the healer or their ally. Like, that makes sense too. It's just the fact that it was described as a spell, which in gameplay terms means a very specific thing, that has me thinking it could potentially be something else. I mean, hey, another interesting way this could go would be making all of the melee GCDs count as weapon skills, while all the ranged ones count as spells. And then you could actually choose if you wanted to go skill speed or spell speed on your Bastion, and lean into using one style more frequently. Like, say your static is ignoring the main tank off tank thing, and you're running Paladin Bastion with the Paladin being the main tank and having aggro most of the time, then for prog purposes, you could have the Bastion just put on spell speed and kind of spam their healing spells to keep people alive for longer or something like that, while also going full ranged mode, because when you're progging, you're not really trying to focus on DPS, so it's okay if one of your tanks just walks off to the edge of the arena next to the Fizz ranged to allow the melees a bit more room to not die, as well as just kind of the easier you can spread while rolling your GCD, the more likely it is for you to survive to the next mechanic, even if you don't execute it properly. There are a lot of cool ways this could go, but 6 months out from the expansion, they still haven't shown us any actual combat, so I have to just speculate here. Overview of the overworld area in Naglfar. Very pretty. The base of the Arc Crystal does in fact have the same fountain we saw in the CG trailer, so I don't know, maybe that was depicting Naglfar the entire time, maybe the entire thing including the base of the crystal was moved, we don't know. The fourth is a brand new region, so of course we have new aetheryte designs. I think they're pretty gorgeous. Not quite sure how I feel about the entire prow section of the ship just being a bunch of flat empty fields, but hey, maybe we can go to a lower deck at some point as well. And I mean, there's going to be like maybe 3 ether currents and 2 ether current quests in here. It's not like we're going to have to use base mount speed there the entire time, right? If anything, I'm just impressed that the thing stopping PS4 support for the game in the near future is going to be running up against the hard-coded file size limit for PS4 digital downloads, and not actual performance issues, because, like, they're bumping relatively close up to what 16 looks like with some of these areas, and I'm going to be impressed if they can make this hold a solid 30 on the Switch 2 outside of combat, so the fact that they expect it to run okay on the PS4 is kind of wild to me. Like, it's been how many years since 16 dropped on PC, and I still can't get it to run at a solid 60 no matter how low I put the settings? Yet they're apparently going to have a game with environments that look nearly as good while still being an MMO, run in a functional way on much, much weaker hardware, so I guess CPU 3 just only pours their optimization into 14 and nothing else. We're also shown what appears to be the main hub city of Evercold, Fargarth, which, yes, there is a typo on the slide that spells it Falgarther, but it is in fact Fargarth. This, like Skiltborg actually, is a brand new compound word made up for the game by combining Old Norse or Nordic language words together. In this case, far has the same root as far in Naglfar, meaning ship, and Garth has the same root word as guard, as in Midgard, so it basically just means shipland or ship world. At first glance from some of the concept art and the walk around, you might think this is a completely unique location, but we have in fact seen it from the outside several times. It is located on the stern of Naglfar, and you can see that there is a blue bubble on there in several wide shots of the ship, so it looks like the city of Fargarth is just protected by that in some way, which is why it looks very Guado Salami from the inside. Very cool looking hub city. In addition to the Guado Salam vibes, it also makes me think of a combination of several cities from Xenoblade 2, because of course it does. Hopefully the market board is in a good place here. I could be spending a lot of time. Also, the fact that Soken came up with the theme used for the walk-around in one night, and that's not even the final theme for this area, is probably the most a Square Enix composer has made me feel worthless since I learned that Yasunori Mitsuda was younger than me when he composed the Xenogears soundtrack on his own, and that was when I was like 5 years younger than I am now. The last walk-around is, of course, of Hringhorni, the other major area they showed off, and for this ship, it looks like we are definitely going to be exploring multiple decks because it is a more compact, round ship, and we can see an aetheryte at a dock that appears to be on a lower level, so it looks like we're going to climb up, and the big city on the top level is going to be where the second or third aetheryte is. Also, considering that the entire ship seems to have a relatively large city on it, and we've been given zero hints at all as to where or what the second hub city could be, suggesting it is not on one of the two ships we've seen so far. So I'm guessing that most of the city on Hringhorni is either just going to be completely inaccessible, tall buildings, sort of similar to Living Memory, or it's going to be done in an Alamigo sort of way, where you get maybe a couple blocks of the dense city center itself, and then the edge of the zone prevents you from going deeper into it, and you just go into a smaller instanced area via a teleport if we actually go into one of the big buildings as part of the story. There's also a slide showing off concept art of all 5 realm ships. Hringhorni is the one on the left, Naglfar is the one in the middle of the middle. Top mid has a lot of blue in it, but it has the most wing-looking wings on it, so it by default has to be the wind one. The one on the bottom middle is dark colored and has a lot of lightning around it, so it's got to be the lightning one, which leaves the one all the way on the right that has craggy mountains on it to be Earth. Curiously, I couldn't tell you where on the other 3 ships the second city could be just by looking at this art, and that's kind of exciting. It could mean the city isn't on any of them. It's either like a last bastion on the surface, or some hidden thing on one of the regular sky islands out there. Or there just is a 6th ship that is the second city. All of those would be very interesting possibilities. Though, if I did want to pick one of these ships to put it on, I think I'd have to go for a city in the mountain on the Earth ship, because that is a very cool kind of aesthetic that we haven't really seen in 14 on a large scale. Though, based on the Sphene trial, it seems to indicate that besides the 9th, which was beset by lightning, the other 3 unexplored shards were beset by ice, that of course being the 4th, and then wind and earth. So that could potentially overlap with a future expansion if we ever go to the shard that was being aligned towards Earth. And if we want to go in that direction, it actually does just leave Naglfar and Hringhorni as the only 2 realm ships that have an element that isn't directly associated with one of the unexplored shards. Like, there's no way they're putting a city on the lightning element ship, because that's way too close to stuff from Dawntrail. So I'm not sure. I kind of like the surface or other island or other secret ship idea, especially because, as we're going to see in a minute, Hringhorni does not appear to be in a particularly significant section of the plot. Yes, there's the Bastion guy who's probably going to be an important character, but it does seem like we're going to be able to visit 3 of these ships in whatever order we want, and I'm guessing they're going to just straight up be the 4th's equivalent of the 3 city-states of Eorzea. So we're going to go there, we're going to meet important representatives from them, and then later on they're all going to unify for the plot. And this makes sense because depending on your starting class, you can go to the 3 starting cities in ARR in any order you want. So expanding that to 3 entire areas of a 6-area expansion is just an increase in scope of that same concept. And yes, the first way they're trying to shake up MSQ progression is by letting you choose areas in any order you want. Now yes, in every expansion since Shadowbringers, at the beginning of the story, after you get introduced to the first area and the major city, You're given the choice between two quest lines that are usually associated with two different characters, and bring you to one of two different areas, which you partially explore, with both routes converging before the first dungeon of the expansion, and later on you go back to both of the areas you partially explored, seeing the rest of them and completing the regional story. In this case, after getting introduced to Naglfar and going to Fargarth and probably learning the general premise of Evercold's plot, you are going to just straight up have the choice to go to any of 3 of the other ships, in any order. You can stop the MSQ line on a specific ship at any time you want to go start exploring one of the other ones, and throughout this entire segment of the MSQ, everything will scale to match your level, so you're not locked into just doing the level 101 quests, and then you have to move on to the 102, and then the 103. Everything is going to scale for 3 entire areas, and because you're exploring the entirety of these zones, you're going to have 3 separate dungeons, and each of these dungeons is also going to scale to your level, while also dropping scaling gear, no matter which order you go through these zones in. All of this, I think, sounds good. They already have a precedent for gear that changes item level depending on your character's level, with the artifact armor from both Endwalker and Dawntrail getting an eye level upgrade once you hit that expansion's level cap. Yellow and Allied Society quests do already have some level scaling, and I think being able to properly scale instanced duties is a good thing for the developers to be able to have in their tool bag for later on, because this also allows them to, quite possibly, more easily balance older instances that have been completely power crept by the way job design has changed over time, and maybe do things like make the average ARR dungeon less of a face roll so that your leveling roulette time isn't just randomly 10 minutes shorter if you get a dungeon from the beginning of the game versus like Shadowbringers. Or, even better, allow semi-automated retuning of old Extreme and Savage content to make them a bit closer to the experience you would have doing them in their current expansion. And hey, like, please extend that to Ultimate. I'm completely okay with never scaling up the level requirement for each of those fights, because they should remain as an unsyncable microcosm of the expansion they were released in, but I also don't think you're supposed to be able to completely kill the phase in UCOB you only have to bring under 60% HP, when there are still several trio mechanics left to go in the phase. They also talked about dynamic scaling for duty difficulty when you're going in dungeons with your Chocobo much later on, and that also makes me think of another way to do it. Job DPS has historically only ever been balanced around the current level cap with 0 consideration paid to lower ones, so what if instead of each job getting a potency changing trait at each level cap to try and curb that, they instead just take record of which jobs do much more DPS at each level cap, and use dynamic scaling to adjust things like enemy HP values and outgoing damage, depending on the team comp. So instead of having to balance the jobs, they just balance the encounter around the jobs. Now this, of course, still runs the issue of person with good job doing twice as much DPS as person with bad job, but at the very least you're not killing normal modes before half their cool mechanics go out, and harder fights you at least have to think about the fact there's a DPS check still. Now, the biggest actual concern I've heard about this scheme is that it might get in the way of the story, because you're basically doing half the story in whatever order you want. But the way they've set this up is that you get the intro, and then the next 3 areas are the ones that you can do in any order. And I'm gonna be real, not only does it seem like you don't fully explore Naglfar in your first visit, but also areas 2 through 4 in a given expansion usually don't see the plot escalate so much, where you couldn't reasonably rewrite them to go in any order and be more episodic adventures focusing on specific characters or locations. Like, yes, go to new place, meet people living around local Aetheryte, learn about their culture, help them stop some bad guy, is a pretty tried and true formula for FF14 just in general, but that does tend to at least slow down near the climax of most expansions, and as long as you meet everyone and learn all the world building details you need prior to the climax starting, it doesn't really matter what order they go in. Like, even in Dawntrail, which does just straight up give you its own climax and resolution halfway through the expansion before doing an entire second storyline, in the beginning part with the succession contest, if they didn't write it so that at least one of Wuklamot's rivals showed up every time you did one of the trials, you could pretty reasonably make like 10% through 45% of the MSQ completely open world and do more or less any of the tests in whatever order you want. And just say that because Mamook is where Galul Jaja is from, that's the place you have to go last, so you have to get all the other gym badges first, so that that part of the story can still go in the right place, because that's basically the only part of the succession contest that needs to go at the point in the succession contest it does. Like, say, okay, after you got 4 gym badges, no matter where you've been or what you've done, if you're in Urkapatra, Valagarmanda is let out and all of that plays out exactly how it did, but if you're in any other area, you get a message that something big has happened in Urkapatra, and then you go there and the Valagarmanda stuff happens. Like, yeah, going to explore 3 of the 5 ships in whatever order we want, we meet the same characters, and they can just say, you'll get Meanwhile in Garlemald Scene 1 after you clear your first ship, and then Scene 2 after you clear your second ship. So the actual plot can still advance, even though the exploration part is a lot more open-ended than usual. Like, I understand why people might be concerned about this, but also, the writers are aware that they're trying to do this, so they can just write it so that it wouldn't be an issue. Now, I don't think there's going to be any substantial differences in the way the plot plays out, depending on which order you go in, but I'm sure there are going to be dialogue variations on each of the 3 ships, depending on which order you've been to them through. Like, the Rogadin Bastion guy, he'll say, oh, so you've met so-and-so and so-and-so if that's the 3rd ship you've gone to. Or we'll say, so I'm the first leader of a realm ship besides person on Naglfar you've met if it's the first one you've gone to, and stuff like that. The only thing this really suggests to me is that the first trial is going to be level 105. Of course, unless it's still 103 and just automatically takes place after you've cleared 1 or 2 ships or whatever, as a set moment in the story like I mentioned before that doesn't directly have to do with any of those 3 plot lines. I guess it is also possible that there are just going to be more than 3 MSQ trials this time around, though that seems highly unlikely. And honestly, I would love for them to mix up the formula. Like, yeah, we're probably going to be level 105 coming out of the 3 ship section and all that, and then we're going to go through the rest of the areas to do the rest of the levels. That's fine. But also, I think it would be neat if we went into this expansion with them saying, the trials are not necessarily going to be 103 and 109 this time. Yes, the 3rd one is going to be the final boss, but we're not going to tell you what levels the other 2 are. Just specifically say they might be breaking the formula. Maybe one of them is still 103 or 109, but the other, it could be 105, it could be 107. We just don't know when the trial is going to happen. Like, the whole, what do you mean we're only still level 83? With the Zodiark fight worked really well in Endwalker, but also, imagine how much harder it would hit if previous expansions had made a point of not having trials sometimes until the 5th level of the expansion or whatever. So there even being a level 83 trial at all would be part of the surprise and stuff like that. Also, I kind of like the idea of bumping the 2nd trial down to level 107 instead of always being level 109. In part for pacing reasons, because necessitating that there's one major encounter right next to the climax where you go to the final area and then have the final boss can sometimes make the middle of the expansion drag a little bit or not have as many exciting moments. And then also because for a very long time, the second to last dungeon of the expansion has been dungeon that lets you go up to the level cap of the expansion, but sinks you to a lower item level than actual level cap stuff. And then it involves you going to the arena where the second trial of the expansion takes place. And then the final dungeon of almost every expansion is the dungeon where you're at the level cap and you go to the arena where the final boss trial takes place. So like, you're doing the same thing twice in a row, and for the earlier dungeon and trial, you're just doing the same thing at the same level, you're just locked to a lower item level than usual. So the final trial feels like a much less climactic endpoint of the expansion thing when you've already used your full max level kit in an 8-player duty already not too long ago. I genuinely think it does a lot for the feeling of progression of your own character's power throughout the expansion if the first time you get to use your new level cap capstone abilities is the dungeon right before the final boss and then the final boss itself. Also, the dungeons preceding Bismarck and Lakshmi aren't just trip to get to the Bismarck/Lakshmi arena, so it makes them feel a bit more unique in that way too. Probably the subtlest thing on this entire graph that no one's really talked about is the fact that the colors of all the example areas actually match the colors of the 5 elements we know the realm ships are. And hey, look at that, Area A with Player Town is blue, like water, like Naglfar, which has a town on it. And then Area B is the fire color, like Kringhorni, when it's pretty clearly suggested that it's going to be one of the earlier story areas because they showed it off already. So if we can take this as gospel, it does look like we're going to start off on Naglfar, get to the city, and then after that we're going to get a choice between Kringhorni, Windship, and Earthship, complete those in any order, and then the linear plot converges again on the Lightning Ship, which is the 5th area we're going to visit, before we probably return to Naglfar for stuff like that, and go on into the endgame. This does also suggest, of course, that the second hub is either going to be on the Lightning Ship or something we visit after Earth, Wind, and Fire, but who knows? They could still mix things up and introduce us to important elements in one of the non-linear areas, because of course I'm guessing the post-expansion MSQ, where the main hub is going to be the second city, is going to be fully linear. And we're not going to get, like, the ability to choose whether we do 8.1, 8.2, or 8.3 in any order or something. The next thing they discuss is basically just a recap of how they're changing weekly rewards and stuff. They're saying, oh, we're moving things from a daily to weekly thing, we're moving things from a daily to weekly thing. And I honestly don't know why they're trying to say that. With the exception of the once-a-day bonuses and experience and payouts for roulettes, everything in 14 already runs on a weekly system. Like, yes, maybe this does need to be explained for more casual players, but saying it at a FanFest isn't necessarily the best way to do it. The important thing, though, is that basically doing challenge log stuff gets you weekly points, and those weekly points replace the weekly tombstone grind. So instead of just having to do a bunch of expert roulettes, then you can just do whatever you want to get points, and like ocean fishing once is worth a whole bunch. You even get things for doing a yellow side quest and stuff like that. And they did outright confirm that you will be able to, after you've capped out on a week's points, earn points you might have missed from a previous week by doing additional stuff, which they said they were only considering last time. Other than that, though, they mostly just reiterated stuff and did not have any updated UI, still using the same, I believe, FF13-2 inspired placeholders they had last time, so I really don't have anything to say about this. Like, overall, it is a good idea and a good change, but I kind of feel like they shouldn't have dedicated an entire section to it when they didn't really have anything new to say. As far as making things easier for a casual player to understand, though, I do genuinely like the idea of splitting every 2 patches or each tier of gear into a season, just so that those players who might not be focusing on patch schedules or understand that you get better gear every even patch and catch-up gear every odd patch would understand that the maximum item level they have only goes up every time a new season starts. And I'm guessing that the rewards you can get that aren't just tombstone-related things, like they mentioned that you can get emotes, fashion accessories, new action skins and stuff like that, will also rotate out on a seasonal basis as opposed to some other thing. And unlike the kind of mediocre job they've been doing with PvP rewards, you can get things from older seasons in some other way. I'm guessing it's going to be a poetics thing, because I can't see them removing poetics. They've been used as such a catch-all for so long that they're kind of integral to progression in everything from previous expansions, but I am then guessing that they'll just basically become the universal currency for everything that isn't instead locked behind scripts or hunt currency, and that can be spent on basically everything. I also think the concept of you getting these weekly activity points means that design won't be tied to the concept of a tombstone cap period, so I'm hoping that in the case that they open all of this up, they'll increase the poetics cap to something much, much higher than 2,000. They then very briefly touched on evolved mode, as well as the ability to reflect item level down to lower eye level jobs. And again, being very specific, apparently some people were confused by this. You can't use this to make another job level up. You have to be level 110 with a higher item level, and then you can reflect that item level down on another job you have at 110, but don't have as good gear. And like, assuming you still know how to play every job at a basic level, this can only be a good thing. And while yes, not having to grind out expert to get your weekly tome cap is going to relieve fatigue of doing the same thing over and over again, this is also going to help raiders a whole lot when it comes to stuff like weekly savage reclears. Because yes, they've confirmed that stuff is still going to stay relatively the same. But more or less, as long as you have one job at BIS, you can reflect that BIS item level down to any other job, and you'll still be okay to play that in at least the first couple floors of Savage. Because, well yes, this system is going to be similar to syncing eye level down in that it doesn't confer materia bonuses. Unmelded BIS is probably still going to be better overall than pentamelded crafted gear, so it should still be possible to clear even a 4th floor Savage fight with all 8 players doing this. Of course, you're probably going to be hitting a lot of enrages week 2 if everyone swaps to a job or role they're unfamiliar with, but that's a skill issue, not a scaling issue. Either way, this means that if you clear Savage week 1, you at most need to do 2 months of reclears before you're able to take literally any job you want into Savage, and that is so much of an improvement over hoping you win the Twine and Solvent drop so you still have enough books to go to pity on all of your gear pieces, and then also waiting like 4 or 5 weeks at your 450 tombstone cap in order to buy all the gear you need too. The next topic was actually expanding on something, and that is the character action skins. And even though they did use Dragoon as a demonstration, they've actually confirmed that general actions, so non-combat and non-job related things, are going to be the first things rolled out. demonstrating 2 variations for the teleport animation. And like, yeah, obviously this is a good thing. This is something people have been modding in forever, and now it's something that's going to actually be available to console players and stuff like that. And this isn't even a case of them saying something is cheating, banning someone, and then implementing that mod into the game itself. I don't think they banned anyone, they're just doing this. But they did in fact confirm that general actions will be the first things available in 8.0, and they're going to start adding job actions in 8.1. They did also more or less outright say that these action skins, or at least ones for general actions and not job-specific ones, are going to be some of the new rewards you can get through doing your weekly stuff. And hey, I'm a Dragoon main who started in 5.5. I would love to be able to use the Ring of Thorns animation for the first time in my life. Dark Knights won't even just get plunge back, they might even be able to get all of their actually good GCD animations back. Wouldn't that be crazy? And Butcher's Block and everything else. And that's great. But I'm kind of curious. Where would you get the job-specific action skins for? Because I couldn't really see it be a weekly reward thing unless you get a mystery coffer and the items that drop from it depend on what job you are and it just gives you action skins through that. But I'm kind of thinking, if they want to bring back job quests, maybe give us a new level 110 job quest capstone, and completing that quest gives us a pack of animation skins for that job. Now, they did seem to imply that they're going to be rolling out not just jobs after general actions, but also that they're going to start with some jobs and gradually add more as they go on. So I'm assuming what they're going to do is start with the ARR jobs that have had the most animations removed, and therefore the most they can just take the already existing animation file and put back in the game as an option. And then the further on they get, they're going to go to more recent jobs that have had less animations removed from them, and therefore more brand new animations for them that need to be created. Also, this is the first instance of, hey, you see this cool new feature? Well, guess what? It's actually going to be 8.1x instead of 8.0x. And I'm going to assume this is largely because the big thing for 8.0 is implementing all of Evolved Mode at the same time. And yes, that is fair. They are in fact completely redoing the combat system from the ground up, but this does more or less leave us with the MSQ, 2 Extreme Trials, and 4 Savage Raids as the only big new things in 8.0, and if Evolved Mode flops, it's going to be a really dire situation in terms of just stuff to do trademark in the video game. And I'm gonna be real, they didn't show off any new Evolved Modes here, and of the ones they showed off last time, Dragoon I think is actually pretty cool. Bard they turned into Endwalker Summoner, and Paladin and White Mage are more or less just simpler versions of their existing Dawntrail Reborn mode versions, so not exactly a lot of confidence in that whole aspect of the game so far, but there's still plenty of time for me to be surprised. And yeah, I gotta say, just based on these teleport examples, they did genuinely take a big long look at the ways people have been modding animations, because they didn't have the whole trip over and fall into teleport one that a lot of people use, but the 2 options they showed were Angelic Light one and Demonic Dark one, and yep, ignoring things that you could never put in a T-rated online game officially, one of those 2 things does describe basically every modded character I've ever seen, so good on you for doing your research. And then we get the most important announcement of the entire keynote, Lalafell Chin's Round 2. And by that I mean, they talked a bit more about the new character creation options, and they started out with pretty subtle, boring things, and then hit us with a really big cool whammy at the end. Like, this isn't even a complaint, I'm just making a joke, because releasing the shackles on hair and skin color was a really big thing last time, so it was gonna be kind of hard to top that, unless they just straight up showed that they're adding new sliders for things, which they did tease later on. But yep, some racial features you can turn on or off, like the dark noses on Lalafell and Viera. You could probably turn off the black strip on male Rogadin noses for certain subraces too. And then of course, the big deal, Aura horns have now been completely decoupled from face selection. And that's good, because that means that they can probably decouple other things from individual faces. Like, yeah, it's cool, you can now remove some of the face markings on Makote, as seen here with Peeled Howling Blade, who looks extremely cursed that way, honestly. I think many people should leave it on, because it just looks weird with them having it off. But I think it would also be cool if, on a face that doesn't naturally have those markings, you could add them. Or you could add markings that have been historically tied to a specific face to another face, and stuff like that. Also, yes, they did erroneously refer to the male Makote face markings as face paint, when that is not true. Those are just genetic markings that exist on their skin. Hopefully that was a mistranslation. They're not retconning the lore for this choice, when the lore accurate way to not have that would just be a mixed race Makote who might just not have that because of genetic reasons. And I do think that's kind of cool. Like, you can much more easily make characters who are a mix of both sub-races and stuff like that. I don't know if we're ever going to go as far as getting Hilda's half Elezen ears on here so we can make proper mixed race in between different peoples ones, not just the two sub-races, but that would be a cool way to go in the future with stuff like that. Also, I'm wondering, now that they're doing this, will they finally update Flamine's model to accurately show that she is supposed to be mixed Suncat and Mooncat, as opposed to just being a regular Mooncat model with a Suncat name? I think that would be a cool way to go. Like, if a character has lore things behind them that would make some of these option changes make sense for them in the universe of the game itself, then it would be cool to change that on the NPCs to give players the option to see something like that and realize that's something they could change on their own character if they want to. Yoshi and Koji have another little skit talking about Butt Slider and stuff like that, and it basically amounts to, we're looking into it. And like, yeah, I don't know if they're literally going to add specifically a slider that changes the character's butt size. It does make sense considering a boob slider does exist already, but I think just general weight and body proportion sliders would go a long way too, because a lot of MMOs, even ones contemporary with the release of 1.0, if not ARR, already had much better customization options than 14 does, so anything to better customize the look of your character is better in the long run. And honestly, like, I joked about the boob slider before because it's an easy target to go for. They should probably also just kind of increase the bounds of that as well. Like, depending on the race, 0 on the slider is not particularly flat-chested, and 100 is not particularly large if you scale that character's proportions to regular real-world human size. So even giving more options to the Gooners gives more options to anyone who wants to represent their character the way they envision them. Yeah, general weight sliders would be a cool thing, or even a muscle tone slider that actually looks like muscle and not whatever it looks like as it does now. Those would be cool too. Yeah, obviously being able to make your Elezen character a little less spindly would be neat. If someone actually wants to make a larger character, that would be cool. But also, you should be able to get thinner than you already can. Like, Yoshi P explicitly said he's choosing to throw lore out the window to give players more choices on how they represent themselves. So why not just let you make complete freaks of nature? Let me make my Elezen arms actually twigs. Let me see a skinny Lalafell. I'm sure that would be extremely uncursed. And yes, this does involve creating entire new systems to scale individual pieces of gear depending on these sliders, but they are also already working on changing the way gear works at a fundamental level in order to do the feature where you can remove certain outer elements of them. So considering they're able to remove things like that, then it does kind of seem like they already have the underlying mesh framework of like the actual attached to the body part of the gear. And maybe now that they're able to isolate that, they can scale that around sliders more and then just put the pieces they can take off back on if you choose to have them on or something like that. I don't know. It seems like they're a lot closer to being able to do this kind of thing than they've ever been before. So it is much more a reasonable expectation now than it ever was in the past. And hey, while we're talking about this, they really need to change facial hair options. Like, yeah, don't gender lock as many customization options and clothing designs as exists already. That's already a good thing. But also, do not tie facial hair to faces. On my Elezen face, the only options I have are villain goatee and Urianger sideburns, and I would love to have just like actual stubble or a short beard or something like that. Male Midlanders can still only use meteor stubble on a completely unique face sculpt that is just a copy of the default one, but with the beard on it. There are a lot of really small changes that can be made to drastically improve the quality of the character creator, and I think now that female Hrothgar have been implemented, they should also go in and stop tying literally every Hrothgar feature to face shape too. Another feature briefly mentioned at Anaheim and expanded upon slightly here is the idea of bringing elements from exploratory zones like Eureka and Baja into the open world to improve the public non-instance field areas and add more content to them. Objectively, this is a good thing, and I believe it has been confirmed that Mr. Ozma is the one working on this new system, which has now been given the tentative title of World Raids. However, they didn't even have a dedicated slide for it, and couldn't give any more details other than we are in fact still working on it, and will hope to be able to share more information with you soon. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be a base 8.0 feature yet again. And this is really something that needs to come out at the beginning of an expansion, because when else is there actually going to be a lot of people running around in the overworld zones? Once people are done with the MSQ, they're just going to be hanging out in some city 90% of the time unless they're working on Shared Fate. And yeah, it seems like this has nothing to do with Shared Fate or the existing Fate system. So I don't really know. Like, yeah, there's the special boss fates, and I think adding stuff like CEs and duels to the regular open world is a fantastic idea, but how exactly are you going to have a world raid with everyone collabing to do things together when nobody's actually out in the world? I guess it could be something similar to how Odin was executed back in ARR, or like Behemoth, which were fate bosses that were so important they got to be in the pre-rendered opening. So something like that could be cool. It just seems like they're not going to be able to drop it at a time when it would really make sense unless they want to delay it all the way until the next expansion. Next major feature they talked about is auto move, and I think this is very funny because you have people complaining about auto move being added and saying that it's absolute confirmation the game has been dumbed down forever, when my concerns about the game being dumbed down are from things about the actual gameplay they showed. And then also people in the same breath talking about how they want ether currents removed because how dare I have to actually play the video game in my video game. So I'm okay with a feature that has been in MMOs forever being added to this MMO. This is another one of those things that they said is going to have a staggered rollout, and in this case, it makes complete sense regardless of the amount of work going into other things, because I'm assuming they're going to start out with Evercold areas, which already has to cover not just the 8.0 MSQ, but every single optional quest in all 6 of those areas too. And then once they have everything working properly in the more recent areas that were designed from the ground up to have this feature, they'll begin backporting it to older ones, I'm guessing starting with ARR and working forward, adding maybe an expansion's worth of areas every other patch or something, basically the exact same way duty support had been updated throughout Endwalker and Dawntrail. And hey, if you don't like ether currents, just use this on all the ether current quests, and watch YouTube on your second monitor while your character walks to all of them. You're gonna still have to find the ones just out there in the wild on your own, but skill issue. I know I complained about Naglfar, but that's an area design issue, not you have to explore the area to fly in the area issue. I'm completely okay with that. Xenoblade X is the greatest open world game of all time, and you can't even get a ground vehicle on that game for like 30 hours, or the ability to fly for another 20 after that. Plus, I complained about Xenoblade 1 giving you a super fast vehicle way too early when I wish they did it similar to getting your last ether current for finishing an MSQ in the zone, and only let you use it after you finish the story in an area. There are a lot of places 14 can, should, and probably needs to improve, but also sometimes the way things are just works as is, and this is one of those times. Next up, the addition of a new difficulty in between normal and savage for 8-player raids. Obviously, this is objectively a good thing, especially the way they are implementing it. It does not directly give you savage gear, so it doesn't make doing savage worthless if all you want to do is get max eye level as soon as possible. It isn't required for savage, so it doesn't add more busy work for people who just want to do the high-end raiding part of the game. And its difficulty is below an extreme trial, which is absolutely pitch perfect. And that's because while there are many players that are scared of doing any sort of high-end content, a stepping stone to savage already exists, and that is extremes. Those already are a thing. First floor savages are never much harder than an extreme in the same expansion, and in fact, more recently, I think most first floor savages have been easier than a contemporary extreme. Barring the fact that the DPS check and the item level scaling is much, much more generous, Enuo is a harder fight than Van Fatale, and Sphene is a harder fight than Black Cat. I have not done Cruiserweight and did not do Necron or Zilenia on content, so I can't compare those, but it was pretty similar for Endwalker too. Now, of course, the base 2 extremes of an expansion are always the easiest ones, and are probably the best thing to do if you want to ease someone into higher end content, but if someone is just scared of the extreme label, these new raids are another way to do that. Now, my toxic high-end raider opinion is that all content should have an enrage, and the difficulty is just in the difficulty of the mechanics before that enrage, and in how long you get before it goes off, but I am okay with the idea that no normal content actually has a hard DPS check like that, so I am hoping that these intermediate raids, because they're supposed to approach extreme difficulty at the high end, will have a proper true enrage after a set timeline of mechanics, but the DPS check is just very, very lenient, so that it will literally only matter if you're going in raw min eye level, and they're expecting people with maybe unmelded equivalent of uncapped tome gear, or unmelded crafted gear with no extreme weapon or anything, would be okay with it. So like, the most you need to do is just get that 1 gear level up past your artifact and final dungeon set. Then, as long as the mechanical difficulty is analogous to Advanced Criterion but on an 8-player scale, making it something that you don't need to actively go and prog or watch guides for, but still something that will probably cause a few wipes at least in Duty Finder, working up to maybe an easier end extreme fight by the 4th fight of the tier. Once you have your friend through all of those, you can just say, hey, you already did an extreme trial, come with me, let's do the first 2 extremes of the expansion to get you some better accessories and a better weapon, and then hey, why not try out the first Savage fight when that comes out, because it's probably not going to be harder than that. It is a perfect on-ramp, while not invalidating any content that already exists, and provides a very, very big shot in the arm for people who actually want mid-core content, as in stuff that isn't a complete trivial face roll that barely gives you any rewards, but also won't have players assuming you've studied every mechanic and know exactly how to do everything before you go in the first time. I may be misinterpreting what was said, but the way the rewards for it are described are a way to gradually increase your item level, but not just giving you Savage gear, which to me implies that you get the regular normal raid gear from the normal, and then possibly by using items that drop from this middle difficulty, you can eventually upgrade those gear pieces into the Savage equivalents. Which, hey, if that allows you to, while you're Savage raiding and getting your weekly drops from that, also slowly upgrade another set of gear into its Savage equivalent, so you can get closer to Biss on another job along the way, that's pretty cool. I'm pretty there for that. It is also possible that this just allows you to upgrade it to the same eye level as the upgraded crafted gear, so 10 below Savage instead, and I think that would also be cool as well. It just seems to be a way to get gear of a high enough eye level to be relevant if you do want to jump into Savage later on, while also not just permanently granting a third set of max eye level gear for each job that you have to take in consideration and grind for when getting your Biss. I think the biggest question is, where in terms of mechanics being used and overall presentation will this fall in between normal and Savage? Like, normal raids are always just the Savage encounter with many mechanics stripped out and what remains made significantly easier, not requiring much thought or coordination with other players. Obviously, this middle difficulty is going to be in between that, but are we going to see a full version of the Fight Savage timeline, but with easier versions of mechanics? Or are we just going to see the mechanics from normal, but made more difficult, but less so than their Savage versions? And then also, if the 4th fight of each tier is approaching extreme level, will we see Phase 2 there, or will it be an exclusively Savage thing? I'm not sure, and that's honestly kind of exciting, especially because, well, if they put Phase 2 in this intermediate difficulty, then they could put a Phase 3, or expand Phase 2 in a different way in Savage, or something like that. I love the idea of Savage just always having an additional thing on top of it that you just can't get without doing the hardest version of the fight. And adding a third version of the fight lets you kind of cheat towards the Savage version in a way that allows you to go even more over the top with Savage. And that's a pretty exciting proposition, especially given how good Arcadian turned out overall on a Savage level. Forcing them to make 2 different easier versions of each Savage fight on different levels could allow them to let even more loose when designing the actual Savage versions and leave less cool ideas on the cutting room floor, because if something doesn't make the cut for Savage, well, just stick it down in one of the easier modes, and leave only the best of the best ideas you have for the true best version of the encounter. Also, I'm pretty sure the Savage version of the 12th fight of the upcoming raid tier is going to have a completely brand new final phase, if only because telling a Final Fantasy VII fan who's finally getting into 14 that they have to do Savage just to see Safer Sephiroth is probably going to cause a riot. So yeah, normal mode 12 only being Bizarro Sephiroth, Safer showing up in the intermediate difficulty, and then him getting just a straight up brand new ultimate style final form in the Savage is a lot more likely than you'd think. Honestly, the only real negative thing I can say is that it's absurd they haven't come up with an actual name for this difficulty, because this is the 8-player version of what Advanced Variant Dungeon was for 4 players. So, because it's the same thing, it should just be called Advanced. I don't know why they're still trying to figure out a name for it when they already have the perfect one right there, that people who have already been playing the game kind of already know exactly what it stands for, while also making perfect sense for someone just getting there and seeing there are 3 difficulties. Now, yeah, I do think below extreme level content needs to be made harder, and another easy way to ramp people into actual hard content would be making them have to actually think in normal content. So, I'm going to always snark that it's not normal, advanced, and savage. It's very easy, normal, and hard, but I don't know. Again, if they're doing 3 difficulties, that might allow them to do more on the higher difficulty, especially if we have another level of fights that's extreme level, that could push the extremes harder, and then extremes being harder could also push savage harder. And yeah, I'm gonna be real, they have to be doing a lot of massaging to those clear numbers, not just for savage, but also normal, because there's no way 85% of characters have done the normal raids. Just period. Like, of characters that have completed the base Dawn Trail MSQ, 85% of them have probably started light heavyweight. I agree with that. Like, 85% of people who cleared Dawn Trail probably did M1N, but beyond that, I don't really agree. Like, did 85% of characters who completed the 7.4 MSQ even complete M9M? I'm not quite sure. And 20% of people completing Savage? That has to mean amount of characters who have cleared Dawn Trail, who have also cleared one Dawn Trail Savage fight at any point in between the release of Light Heavyweight Savage and whenever they stopped recording data. Like, this has to include people going back to the first tier and later patches, right? Like, there's no way so many people in JP do Savage that it brings up the, like, what, 5 to 10% average of people who clear one Savage fight per tier in NA and EU up that much. Like, maybe this is the percentage of people who have cleared a normal tier who have done at least one Savage in the duration of Dawn Trail. I can't make sense of that number being that high, even accounting for JP. Unless this is specifically the JP numbers and they're just not telling us that. Then we finally get the date for the first test of unifying all data centers in a region, and it's October 12th in Japan. Great time to start doing that. You know, after the Ultimate Raid, after a lot of people will be completely done with Occult Crescent, long after the MSQ patch. Like, I guess saving it for a time when activity is really dying down is a good thing because there'll be less players, so you won't have to fully stress test it until later. But also, like, they probably should have done this earlier if possible, so you could make better use of it with all the new content, you know? Anyway, the next thing is, yup, the level cap is increasing. Yup, we're adding new treasure hunts, new fates, and new hunt stuff. This is, I guess, not encompassed in the stuff they said they were improving, which is surprising because that means the new overworld content that they're going to talk about later is not directly connected to fates. I kind of expected it would be an increase of the fate system, but, you know, that's fine. I like them adding more things instead of just making existing things bigger or more bloated. I just think expanding fates would be an easy way to do that, but it's kind of a better thing if they're not taking the easy way, I guess. Next, we have concept art for several dungeons. The first appears to be on an ocean with volcanic islands and steampunk-looking ships. Then, there is a platform in the middle of a lake, surrounded by what could be gravestones potentially, and a structure in the water behind it. Then, there's another very Xenoblade 2 looking locale because the light in the background really looks like the World Tree, and a village that looks like it would be on Naglfar, and then what appears to be another boss arena above the caldera of a volcano or something. So, based on the top left and bottom right, it looks like there might be non-cold areas in the surface, because this doesn't look like Hringhorny, and I couldn't see either of these being locations on the Earth ship, because this is to fire, even if volcano is actually Earth and not fire, you know? Yeah, there could be a big regular sky island that happens to have a volcano on it, or these could be, like, level 110 dungeons that don't necessarily take place on the 4th because they're optional and not tied to the MSQ, but I do think it's interesting that these are both concepts you couldn't really do on one of the 5 realm ships. The first screenshot shown is this one, going through a rickety, falling apart hallway with what look like bear traps but are probably just decrepit chandeliers. This looks like a mansion of some sort. I could easily see this taking place on one of the ships. It's hard to tell based on the background, but my guess would be this is Earth just based on the general aesthetic, or lightning just based on the fact that it's kind of messed up and destroyed, and constant lightning strikes could easily do this to a primarily wooden dwelling. Also, like, there's a big pit off the side there, and while that could just be a room below and we're on a balcony, that could also just be straight up an opening down off the bottom of the ship or something. Then we get a screenshot that is very clearly the dungeon shown before that looked like it was on Naglfar. And here we can pretty easily tell exactly what this dungeon is going to be. It is Naglfar Holminster Switch. And by that I mean, this has to be a lower deck of Naglfar, because you can see the same kind of bubble that's around the city here, but the overall lighting of the area doesn't match how any time of day looks in the overworld zone. And this next screenshot, which shows the same lake from the concept art, has what is either a geyser or the bottom of the water arc crystal on it. As in, the crystal goes below what we could see on the surface in the pedestal it's on, and this is the actual bottom of it on another deck of the ship. And I think that is a pretty cool concept to do. And in the big concept art of Naglfar, you can see that there are these light blue windows on the sides that pretty closely match the blue color seen in the sky. So it looks like we might just have another layer of farming stuff underneath the big lake in the middle, where the light comes in from those 2 windows or something like that. Pretty cool, and it doesn't seem like this is the only dungeon that's going to take place on a lower deck of the ships. The next screenshot is very intriguing. It looks like an Asioscope-style descent, but you're in Barbaricha's domain, and there's a square boss arena all the way at the bottom that looks like it could be some kind of wind turbine? Maybe this is a vortex of some sort created by the Wind Jotun when we go off to face it, and this is going to be turning that fight into a dungeon boss where we only are going up against the core here or something? Either way though, it was stated that you can fall off, and not just the boss arena, they seem to imply you can fall off the regular section of the dungeon too, which is not a very big thing, but also, when was the last time there was any sort of threat during the mob pull section of a dungeon? This isn't exactly doing much to shake up the dungeon experience and make it less rote and formulaic than it's been for much longer than I've been playing the game, but this is something they haven't done in a dungeon in a very long time, if not ever, so I'm glad to see they're at least thinking of ways to be more creative even when it comes to dungeons. As long as they don't pull a Dawn Trail and say that dungeons are going to be a bit more difficult and then chicken out of making anything in dungeons actually try to kill you partway through the MSQ, we're looking at least an incremental improvement here. Next screenshot is back on floating islands, and it looks like we're going through a very deserty looking area, making our way through sort of castle-like installations to some big manor in the back. Again, it is very interesting that we've been told time and time again, basically everyone lives on the 5 firmaments, the realm ships, and yet we've got buildings on a regular floating sky island. Perhaps the cold down below has made this desert area uninhabitable for reasons of changing environment and the like, but it is cool to see that there were settlements in the sky that predate the ships, and we are going to be exploring a lot of history of the Fourth, as it seems, on top of just doing things related to the current affairs. It is also possible that this is just a corner of the Earth ship. There's a lot here that looks like quote-unquote naturally formed floating island cliffs, and there are obviously just regular floating islands in the background, so I think it's just at least a good set piece, even if I can't figure out exactly how it exists yet. There's another screenshot of this dungeon, and we can clearly see that the castle is dilapidated, so it's not inhabited anymore, but there is a big crystal thing in the background, and that is very, very intriguing. Are we going back to certain unique aetherites being made by other societies or something? Like how we had to do to access primal fights in the old days? Probably not. But, we only really directly see the arc crystal of water, and it does look like a blue water spout. This is a green crystal that looks a bit like a tornado. Could this be the arc crystal of wind, and we're just on a weird forgotten corner of the wind ship that has the crystal on it for some reason? I don't know. Nothing around here looks like what we've seen of the ship of wind, but there could be an illusion? Maybe the arc crystal doesn't need to be on the ship, and the people of the wind ship just chose to hide it out in this place or something. There's a lot of possibilities, but big crystal in the desert makes me think of the Titan fight from FF16. So if we get a trial against one of the Jotuns that has the same level of production value and general cool factor as the Titan fight from 16, we're in really good hands. Next dungeon screenshot is inside in some sort of mine. This could very easily be part of the same dungeon as the last two, but I think this one is legitimately on the inside of the Earth ship, as not only are there several things glowing in a very Earth amber color, but also this clearly is a mine that's still in use. There are different stacks of things and wood and stuff. There are lights on. There is a door that's actually closed that's probably going to open once you kill the next mobs. There aren't any people around, but it's very possible that we're going and fighting monsters in here after the mine has already evacuated or something, and trying to stop them from reaching an important aspect of the ship. Then we're at appears to be some sort of grand hall in a manor or museum of the like. There's a big chandelier, this one's completely intact and lit, and there are growing plants. So this again appears to be some place that is actively inhabited. This could perhaps be one of the big buildings on either Hringhorni or one of the other ships. Again, I want to say Earth or Wind. This does not look like Naglfar, and the Lightning ship is too overall dark gray and black for it to have this many other colors. The easiest assumption to make is that this is just a room where a mob pull ends and the door in the back is going to open once you kill enough enemies. This has very strong Grand Cosmos vibes, if anything. But I think this being a boss arena would be way funnier. Like you're infiltrating the manor for whatever reason, and you get an ad rush boss, but the way it is the person in charge of the manor is hiding behind the doors and just keeps sending servants out after you. So you take out waves and waves of servants, and then when it's just the actual boss left, they have no HP and go down in 2 GCDs. This would be the first time where all the enemies in the dungeon aren't the same level, and the boss is just like 20 levels lower what every other enemy is, and like not even remotely near the Evercold level range. I think that would be really funny. Probably one of the few ways to make me actually enjoy a boss that's waves and waves of ads, and like if they make it an AoE encounter in every wave, but each of them has like a mini boss who's the main focus and actually has unique mechanics, then that's even better, honestly. If the actual boss is a joke, just make it a mini boss gauntlet or something. Please, I'm throwing out so many ideas, literally anything to make a dungeon not formulaic again. A few more sets of artifact gear are shown off. Ninja looks cool. Warrior is pretty cool. Of course, they nailed that in the Norse expansion. It's kind of neat seeing it get a crown-looking coronet thing like Paladin usually gets. Monk is very typical Monk, but not in a bad way. Sage, I think they finally nailed the aesthetic properly, which is, as long as you dye everything red, you can just be a Char clone without needing to change any piece of gear off the artifact set. Picto is not too different from existing Picto sets, but not in a bad way. And Red Mage is Red Mage, of course the drip is all there. I think one of the most intriguing things about all of this, though, is that most of the gear sets don't look like they're particularly dressing for much warmer weather than usual artifact gear for that job is. Like, yeah, Sage is wearing a long jacket and long pants, but that's what it usually has. Warrior is a lot more covered up than it was in Dawntrail, but also not more covered up than it's been before, and both it and Monk have partially bare arms while wearing gauntlets, stuff like that. This could lead me to theorize that the artifact gear doesn't come from the Fourth itself, especially since it's extremely likely the final area of the game will be going down to the frozen surface, and if they implement the artifact gear into the MSQ like they did for the last 3 expansions, it's kind of interesting then that it wouldn't be specifically dressing warmer, but maybe you are carrying around some sort of fire warding scale equivalent that will keep us warm as long as we keep it on us, so we don't necessarily have to dress heavier. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they did that kind of contrivance, because basically every Scion already has a dedicated winter fit that they used in the Garlemald section of Endwalker, and when we returned there to do the Clidium, everyone just took those off and put on their normal outfits anyway, which is crazy because they already contrived Kryl out of being in the duty support roster, so they didn't even need to invent a winter outfit for her. And yet, like, speaking of Kryl, the Picto outfit has 3/4 sleeves and seemingly slits in the shoulders and a bare midriff, so, like, yeah, we're showing a lot of skin for trying to avoid frostbite here. Then there's some crafters. I'm guessing it is leatherworker, weaver, and then obviously the last one's culinarian. And while these outfits are solid on their own, there are a lot of pieces you could take off them and they'd be generically good anywhere else, which is great because you can actually do that now. Just give us a proper glamour log and like 3 times as many plates and everything will actually be good. Just saying, come Evercold, we're going to have 23 regular combat jobs, 2 limited jobs, 10 crafters, 3 gatherers, 800 glamour dresser slots, and 20 glamour plates. And that's pretty unacceptable even with the armoire improvements and outfit glam. Then some enemies are shown off, and yep, those sure are some enemies, most of which are reusing models that already exist in the game, so I don't really have much to say about them when compared to the enemies that are probably going to be using brand new models that we've seen already. There is a big snake in the background, and that looks somewhat similar to all the snake imagery on Naglfar, so this could potentially be our Jormungandr equivalent for this Norse-themed world. Like, maybe in addition to the 5 elemental Jotnar, there are 5 just like powerful creatures that are associated with the elements, and maybe their energy has something to do with the arc crystals too, and like, that snake could be something worshipped by the people of Naglfar because maybe it's living in one of the lakes on one of the decks of the ship, and that's where the power for the arc crystal comes from or something. So I could see that actually being the main boss of the Naglfar dungeon we saw before, and like, it's testing us to see if we have what it takes to be the hero and solve all the MacGuffin issues in the entirety of the Fourth or something like that. Honestly, if I'm being real, and this is a problem that literally only affects someone who's talking about this stuff for 2 hours like I am, I really wish we got the proper name the people on the Fourth refer to their land as, like how people of the First refer to it as Norvrand. Just because saying the Fourth over and over is getting kind of tiresome, and I'm going to have to replace saying the Fourth with whatever they refer to it as eventually once the game comes out. So I do kind of wish we got the endonym for the region already, because I can't really see that being too big of a spoiler. Then we get another update I'm a big fan of, and that is the duty support update. Obviously, all of the new Evercold dungeons, except probably the 2 optional ones at level 110, are going to have duty support as usual, but now they're detailing the plans for multiplayer duty support. I always assumed it would just be a case of, you can queue up to duty support with less than an entire light party and the rest of the slots would be filled with the regular duty support NPCs. But no, we're getting duo human players and duo chocobo NPCs, and that's even better. It's also stated that, quote, chocobo breeding will get an overhaul, and I'm kind of unsure what that means, because the chocobo you use in combat and will be bringing into dungeons is not a bred chocobo. You use the exact same chocobo from when you first get it as a mount all the way up until now. So it's possible this is a mistranslation and they're just referring to like maybe the way you change the color or alter the stats of your chocobo. Then they also said that the way Geishel greens are used is going to change and the basic commands will be completely revamped, which I think is good. The way chocobos are controlled now is kind of another relic of old pet jobs, and I could easily see there being a lot of good reasons to update that, especially if you'll be able to coordinate moving your character and commanding your chocobo alongside one other person doing the same thing. Unfortunately, it has been confirmed that this is not something you're going to be able to do on your way through Evercold's MSQ, as duty support is going to be an 8.1 thing, and all of the other changes are going to start in 8.2. I will say, though, this pretty instantly tripled the price of Thavnarian onions even on a backwater server like Seraph, so as someone who is not an FC leader but is allowed to use all of the planters for growing Thavnarian onions, I am quite thankful for that. I'm going to be able to recoup all the money I spent on Kefka prep before Evercold comes out without even needing to clear Kefka and joining merc parties. And that's pretty neat, because there are a lot of things happening this year, and I don't even know when I'm going to get around to the last phase of Kefka at this point. Then, after some slight technical difficulties, an extremely slightly updated trailer for the Evangelion Alliance Raid collab was revealed, and the only new information gotten from it is that this is officially part of the EVA 30th anniversary celebration, and Mahiro Maeda has now been attached to the project. He's an artist, animator, animation director, and designer who has worked on Evangelion 3.0 and 3.0 plus 1.0, giving him pedigree with the franchise, as well as concept art for Mad Max Fury Road, of all things. I'm not even sure why they put that on the slide. I think Yoshi P might just like the movie and think it's cool that he got an Evangelion guy who also worked on that. Like, he's done plenty of other things. That was just the one non-Eva thing they decided to spotlight, and I think that's really funny in a good way. Either way, though, I'm not surprised at all that we've gotten no additional information on the collab besides this, because when they first revealed it at Anaheim, it was pretty clear that it was in a, we literally just got the go-ahead to publicly announce this phase, so they probably didn't make it much further since then. And while they have ideas on the gameplay front for how they're going to change Alliance raids, until at least part of the first raid is actually done, which we're assuming we're going to get to see by Tokyo, they're not going to have any details on how to do that because it's probably something they can't easily explain without at least some kind of visual. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how they're going to get 21 different gear sets out of Eva across 3 Alliance raids, because even the plug suits are not very different in appearance across characters. So like they could give you one outfit that is Shinji's plug suit, and then you could pretty easily just dye that and it would look like most of the other plug suits throughout the entire franchise. So while yeah, I could easily see one set being based on the plug suits, one set maybe being heavy armor based on the Eva units themselves, then probably the character's casual gear from some of their appearances in the Rebuild movies. And I'm guessing at least one of the raids is going to like be outfits based on the adult cast of the series as well. I can't see them not giving us Gendo's suit or something like that. And if they put Masato's outfit in, it's going to be the third coming of the 2B leggings. And I'm only saying third coming because Tifa's outfit is getting added way before any of this is going to be. But yeah, Alliance raids haven't been very engaging since Stormblood, so I'm not really expecting much from this, but should have been Xenogears either way. I'm going to stop on this slide here for a moment, just to remind everyone that because it says Ultimate Raid Singular, it does not mean there's only going to be one Ultimate during Evercold. This is the exact same wording that was used prior to Dawn Trail. It was probably the exact same wording that was used prior to Endwalker, and both of those did in fact have 2 Ultimates. Now, technically we're still behind 1 Ultimate, because DSR was delayed and it wasn't a Shadowbringer's Ultimate being cancelled, so I don't know, maybe they should do a 3 Ultimate expansion at some point, but I don't think that's going to happen during the expansion where they're introducing another raid difficulty. It says they're going to do other new types of battle content, which they haven't detailed yet. Oh, and once again, revamping every single job to make Evolved mode, something it seems like Kefka was already designed with in mind. Anyway, the 8-player raid is going to be a collab with the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, and I have thoughts, trademark, about this. Yes, this is multiple firsts for the game. This is the first time 2 major pieces of content have been crossovers in one expansion. This is the first time the 8-player raid series, and therefore the Savage raids, the premier high-end content for the entire expansion, are going to be a collab with another game. Yes, 8-player raids have been based on other Final Fantasy games several times in the past, and the last Ultimate literally was Kefka featuring Chaos and Exdeath, but even though Bahamut, Alexander, Eden, and Pandemonium are all technically references to other Final Fantasy games, those are things that are reskinned and reinterpreted to match the world of FF14, the same way basically every other reference to another Final Fantasy game is. They're references to other FF games in the same way having marbles, chocobos, and a guy named Sid are references to other games. They're new spins on things the series has done before. I'm leaving Omega out, but even the fights in Omega that are literally just a boss from another Final Fantasy game are simulations of another world created by FF14's unique version of Omega that has its own lore connected to the world and universe of 14 and important pieces of backstory of major characters exclusive to 14, like Midgardstormer. Yes, the Kefka in Omega is explicitly a simulation of the actual Kefka from FF6, and all of his abilities are just references to his boss fights in FF6, but it is also a simulation of Kefka that is contextualized and part of the FF14 world. This raid series is an ad for Final Fantasy VII Revelation. That is the only correct way to put it. There is a crazy amount of cope saying that this is 14 breaking glass because of Dawntrail's low popularity and sales, so they're putting in things from the most popular game in the series. No, it is the other way around. Yoshi P has said in the past that he's wanted to include more stuff from 7 in 14, but wanted to wait for the remake trilogy to finish before doing so. So we all kind of assume that, alright, there might be some themes throughout the entire Godless Realm saga, but they're not gonna go hard on direct references to 7 until 9.0. I don't really think anyone was expecting a direct crossover with the games themselves, and not like a single optional seasonal quest that gives you one reward, like it usually is, to be the main way they did this, and to start before Revelation releases. Like, hate Dawntrail all you like, but it is still a Square Enix game. Square is a company that absolutely adores mentioning whenever one of its premiere releases sells short of expectations, and guess what? We never heard anything like that about Dawntrail. But you know what we did hear that about? FF7 Rebirth. This is much more an attempt by Square to get 14 players to try the re-trilogy than it is the other way around, I can assure you that much. And yes, it is directly stated multiple times that this is specifically with the re-trilogy and not the original FF7 or even its original compilation. All the collaborating creators on the 7 side are people who worked on the re-trilogy. The key art they showed here is just directly lifted key art from, I think, Remake, and the title being Beyond the Livestream pretty much confirms that it's going to somehow tie into the meta aspects exclusive to the re-trilogy. And honestly, it's kind of crazy. This means we're basically never getting OG FF7 stuff in 14, period. All the new stuff being added is re-trilogy, and even the Cloud outfit that already exists is Advent Children. So like, we might outright never get Cloud's original outfit in the game, which is absolutely wild to think about. Anyway though, yeah, I'm sure the fights are going to be fine as actual fights to go through, but I'm not a fan of 2 of the 3 raid pillars of an entire expansion just being advertisements for other properties. Like, we've lost so many things that provide additional world building for the setting of a given expansion. The last time a deep dungeon was associated with the expansion it released in was Stormblood. The Shadowbringers Exploration Zone was not on the 1st, so there's a good chance the one in Evercold will not be on the 4th. Job quests are gone. Role quests are fully optional, have been less and less MSQ relevant in each successive expansion since being introduced, even if the Dawntrail Crafter and Gatherer ones are fantastic and are probably the best pieces of writing in Base 7.0. And it seems like the Trial series, which used to be a unique separate storyline for the MSQ, has just been permanently rolled into the post-expansion story, so we're not even getting additional expansion from that. And while Alliance raids have been promos 3 times in the past, the Ivalice ones didn't really even feel like they were promotion for FF12 The Zodiac Age, because they heavily integrated Ivalice and its lore into the world of 14, including making several drastic changes in the present-day state of things that makes things wildly different from FF12. But also, the raid series was much more based on the version of tactics that took place in the past of 14's world. So I honestly didn't even know it was supposed to be an ad for a version of 12 until I looked it up. And on top of that, they made sure to split Nier and FF11 with Myths of the Realm, a very important and heavily tied to the lore and history of 14 series. But now we're following FF11 with not only the first time the Alliance raid crossover is with a property that isn't primarily video games, but also now even the normal raids are a crossover with another Final Fantasy that they're choosing not to integrate into the world of 14 the same way they did for stuff like Ivalice. If they wanted to have Cloud Strife from the actual Final Fantasy VII Revelation game for the Nintendo Switch 2 system show up in 14, they really should have just done a seasonal quest isekaiing him into Eorzea like happened to Lightning and Noctis and Clive, and then made the raid series inspired by 7 in the same way Eden is inspired by 8. Every other promotional collab has either been a seasonal event, either associated with the seasonal quest or the gold saucer, or an alliance raid series. This is the first time it's been anything else, and while yes, if anything is going to get that, it's going to be FF7, that is Square's golden child still, it does just still rub me the wrong way, especially in an expansion where the alliance raid is already confirmed to be a collab. One of my main criticisms of the post-Endwalker MSQ is how a lot of it is very paint by the numbers a retelling of FF4, which is something none of the other homages to other FF games before or since, including Dawntrail, has been. So yeah, I guess they did technically turn the Endwalker Trial series into just promo for another FF game, but this time they explicitly told us this whole FF7 arc is going to be an ad, and I'm just not quite sure how I feel about putting 40 hours to prog my billboard tier and then doing weekly billboard reclears every week until I get BIS on all my jobs and I'm tired of parsing. And then this also means that some ultimate down the line is just going to be an ad for the FF7 re-trilogy, which has been over for like 6 years by then, so I don't really know. I genuinely would have rather the Sephiroth fight been a surprise phase during Kefka Ultimate. That would have actually been a meta thing in the meta ult, which I'm genuinely disappointed doesn't actually do anything meta after the beginning of Phase 3. Maybe it's hypocritical, but a lot of my complaints about Kefka in terms of presentation are that it wasn't FF6 enough, as in it was mostly Kefka just kind of doing things, and I've removed several of the 6 references from his mechanics in Savage. And it also wasn't really Final Fantasy meta enough. Meanwhile, we're finally getting Sephiroth in the game, and instead of integrating it into the world, a world of Final Fantasy XIV that very recently had a successful Project Meteor, mind you, we're just getting the actual Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII Revelation, available now for PS5, PC, and Switch 2, show up and be not just the final boss of an alliance raid, a form of content that has long since been relegated to weekly grind, trivial thing you do once a week to get your coin to upgrade your gear, but inevitably the face of the final Savage fight of the expansion. And literally, if they just told me that this Sephiroth was some sort of Garlean or Allegan experiment, it would be much, much better than it just being a guy or a copy of a guy from the actual FF7. Also, this now means that not only are 2 of the 3 big raid pillars of Evercold going to be collabs, they're going to be ads for an anime with a purple robot, and psychological and religious themes, and the game the original Xenogears pitch was rejected from being. So we're not getting what should have been a slam dunk Xenogears collab twice, and are instead doing 2 different collabs with 2 things that fit 14's world less than Gears would have. Anyway, though, the timing of this announcement did give me a fantastic mental image of Safer Sephiroth trying to do Kefka's Tank Buster and just failing because he only has 1 wing so it doesn't work. And also, like, there's gonna be an inevitable Sephiroth raid 3 expansions after they got too scared to include long cutscenes even in normals after E1. So, like, what's the point of fighting Safer Sephiroth if there's not going to be the entire supernova sequence? But I mean, like, hey, if you want to do a Savage mechanic that has the same level of spectacle as something like Idyllic Dream, fighting during the supernova sequence and, like, arena jumping between planets as they get destroyed, that would be a way to do it. Just saying, I will probably forgive all of my misgivings with this entire raid series if the supernova part of the Sephiroth fight gives us what Endsinger Extreme should have been, because that is genuinely my least favorite extreme in the game because of how disappointing it was. But yeah, considering this is a re-trilogy crossover and there are 3 raid tiers, it's going to be 1 tier for bosses from each game. I'm guessing the 3rd tier might be giving us some of the weapons reimagined. Obviously, the first fight, I'm going to tentatively use L for livestream, so L1 is going to be the original Guard Scorpion, or at least the remake version of it. Hell House is probably going to be in there. I could see that easily being L2 because that sounds like a cool gimmick experimental fight like they love doing for the second fight of a tier nowadays. Not sure what the 3rd fight would be. I'm sure they're probably going to have Rufus in there somewhere, but I'm not sure how they would do that. The 4th fight, I'm guessing, would be some kind of tag team of Reno and Rude because they can't exactly do the actual final boss they put in Remake for a lot of obvious reasons. Rebirth pretty easily gives you a whole bunch of options, and the final fight of the tier would probably be some form of Genova. I'm guessing there would be another Genova fight at some point during the 3rd tier as well, and then obviously L12 is just Sephiroth himself. There are a lot of FF7 bosses from after the Midgar section. It's pretty easy to populate the other 2 tiers. I just don't want to think about that too hard right now. If Ivalice has taught us anything, it is that they're completely okay with putting other games' versions of Ultima directly in. Though, again, they're actually tying Ultima the High Seraph to potential pre-ancient lore of Aetheris, and also being directly connected to the thing that powered the 14 version of the Ultima weapon. Either way though, they might not redo the same weapons that were in the Shadowbringers Trial series, but I could very, very easily see them just directly plopping the Ultima weapon from 7 in here as well. Oh, Hojo. Hojo is probably going to be L10, because experimental, weird, quirky, stupid boss fight sounds right up his alley, and you do fight him pretty close to the end of the game. I mean, like, Materia Keeper and Midgar Zolom are probably pretty good choices. They tend to like doing at least one unique take on a wall boss each expansion, so I could see them doing Demon Gate as well at some point during the second tier. I don't know, I haven't played Rebirth yet. It's probably completely possible to predict the first 8 fights already just from having played both of those games, and just enough knowledge of the original 7 is probably enough to get you at least 2 or 3 from the final tier. Though really, the only question that remains is, are they going to split Sephiroth across multiple fights? Like, are they really going to just do Bizarro Sephiroth as the final fight in normal and make Safer Sephiroth a Savage exclusive thing? Like, yeah, God Kefka was Savage exclusive in Stormblood, but also that was the second tier of the raid series, and I have to remind you, it was not a Final Fantasy VI raid series. This is a promotional collaboration that is meant to highlight the FF7 remakes, so I'm genuinely not sure if they would actually do something like that in this case. And I mean, 011 and 012 were both Omega. They could very easily do Bizarro Sephiroth for L11 and Safer Sephiroth for L12 with giving him some sort of new powered up form, or even just make the Savage exclusive phase of L12 inspired by the final sequence of the final battle and actually make you duel regular Sephiroth on foot with the Masamune, probably for the first time in the raid series. That would be an extremely cool way to do it too. I mean, Melee LB1 is already one of Cloud's limit breaks from FF7. Make the Savage exclusive phase have a mechanic involving giving a specific buff to ensure that it procs on one of your melees, and that buff turns their regular LB3 into Omni Slash instead, and make you need to hit Sephiroth with that in order to kill him? That would be cinema and a cool way to implement something from 7 into 14, though, of course, if Revelation doesn't do the final battle that way, we're kinda SOL because they can't do it the way the original game did then. I think one of the things I'm most intrigued by is the fact that they're completely okay with putting out the first tier of this raid before Revelation releases, which to me almost suggests that, yeah, they're trying to get 14 players, give them a little taste of the 7 re-trilogy so they can play Remake and Rebirth in between 14 patches while waiting for Revelation. Sure, that makes complete sense. But also, it almost seems like they don't consider anything that happens in Remake a spoiler anymore, which coming from the 14 devs would be kind of surprising, but also, like, I wouldn't really consider the first 3 hours of a JRPG to be a spoiler unless something really big like the thing from Xenoblade 1 happens. So yeah, I guess the fact that Remake is a full game made out of the first 5 or so hours of the original 7 does mean it would fall under that same category too. So honestly, well played. Fair enough. Like, just because the spoiler of the thing that happens at the end of Rebirth is one of the most known spoilers in gaming culture period, doesn't mean that I'd rather spoil that part than what happens at the end of Remake or the Midgar section of the original game. Like, I want to keep that spoiler away from people as much as possible. I want as many people who don't know that to play some version of Final Fantasy VII for the first time, still not knowing that. Because it's genuinely cool seeing reactions to something that I knew years before I ever played the game for the first time. Anyway, a lot of the Re-Trilogy development staff is also helping work on this, so it is going to be very heavily tied into things, and I wouldn't be surprised if, like, yeah, some explanation for the meta stuff is shown in 14, because, like, the Re-Trilogy is very, very expensive. I'm sure that even in how much they bloated the original game, they had to cut out a whole lot of things they were planning on doing, and putting it in 14 where people have to wait at most a year to just watch the cutscenes online if they're not actually 14 players themselves, instead of having to maybe wait for an Ultimania or a novel that might never get translated out of Japanese or something to actually learn stuff, is probably a better option. And like, I would absolutely rather my FF7 Revelation ad raids actually be coherent with FF7 Revelation itself, so this is a good thing as far as that's concerned. I'm just like, how's Hamaguchi okay with this? Like, he's still working on Revelation. He's helping supervise this. And did they heavily imply that the remake team is just going to be working on FF17 after Revelation ships? Like, that's got to be a lot of things for one team to work on. Yeah, CBU 3 did 14 and 16 at the same time, but Yoshi P was, if anything, less hands-on on 16, and then Yeah, they also did the Tactics remake, but that was after 16 was done and was a much smaller project, and they already said they barely had time and budget to do that. I don't know. It really seems like they keep just giving heavier and heavier workloads to CBU3, the remake team, and Team Asano because they're the only people at Square who actually know how to ship games anymore. Remember when Dragon Quest XII was supposed to be out already? Remember when Bravely was supposed to be a yearly series? Remember when long waits in between numbered Kingdom Hearts games had like tons of non-numbered games that were also important to the story to tide you over? The KH3 to KH4 wait is almost certainly going to surpass the KH2 to KH3 one, and the only thing that happened in the interim was cancelled mobile titles and a rhythm game with more Kairi disrespect. Honestly, yeah, give Hamaguchi's team FF17. We might actually see it before 2030 at this rate. They're probably just going to alternate giving new numbered titles to that team and CBU3. That's the only way Final Fantasy is going to continue beyond an Ouroboros of remastering of remasters at this rate. Like, I'll criticize Square, but at least the next-gen versions of 7 Remake were next-gen versions of 7 Remake, and not The Last of Us Part 1 Final Fantasy VII or something crazy like that. The next-gen version of Rebirth is cheaper than a brand new game on Nintendo of all platforms, to say nothing of how Intergrade was $20 for a decent time after release. Like, Square can be genuinely non-greedy when they choose to do so, they just don't sometimes. Case in point, all of the keycards and every Switch 2 upgrade not called Dragon Quest III. Anyway, the other Final Fantasy VII thing being added is Typing of the Dead. And like, you'd think I'd crash out about this, but no, that's incredibly funny. I will say I'm not entirely sure why they're adding a giant new hall based on the 7 version of the Gold Saucer for this. Like, aesthetically, it's cool, I have no problem with it existing, but it seems like a big space to just have a few consoles for Keybound Brawler in it. So maybe any future attractions are going to be added through here instead, and they're just using this as an excuse to make an expanded version. Very surprisingly, that is in fact the re-trilogy design of Cait Sith just kind of there in the center of the hall, so unless this is an interdimensional version of the same one from the re-trilogy, I'm assuming they're just not going to address him existing in the Raid series, because that's just him already as a diegetic part of 14's world, and like, yes, there is a version of Cait Sith in the Void Ark Raid series, that's probably what this Gold Saucer version is inspired by in-universe. Anyway though, they explicitly called out that they could very easily make Typing of the Dead clones for any other property, be it a video game or not, and basically directly gave a business proposition to anyone watching, so that's probably going to be how we're going to get Xenogears, if ever. Awesome. But yeah, why would I ever complain about a shitpost minigame being added to the Gold Saucer? Like, this is what the Gold Saucer is for. This is the most Manderville thing of all time. And I absolutely love that they kind of just told console players to buy a keyboard, because even if you play on controller, because you can use the $10 USB keyboard you picked up to actually communicate with people in-game, and maybe get a bit more of the MM part of the MMO. Also, every modern console, including the Switch 2, does support USB keyboards and mice, so if you wanted to play KBM on console, you could have been doing that the entire time, by the way. The most surprising thing about Keybound Brawler, besides the fact that it exists, is of course the fact that the rewards from it are Tifa and Barrett's outfits from the re-trilogy, which, like, how are you going to do 21 Final Fantasy VII gear sets throughout the Raid series when it seems like you're okay with not including party members in there? Like, the default fits of some of the most iconic JRPG characters of all time are Gold Saucer rewards, and not drops from the Raid series explicitly stated to be promoting a version of that game. Maybe they just wanted 7 fans that are trying 14 out to be able to get the outfits early on, and that makes sense. But again, you need 21 outfits across a full 3 raid tiers. And similar to Ava, I'm not quite sure how they're going to be able to come up with that without using party member outfits and still making them interesting and unique. I'm absolutely amazed Tifa isn't the striking set, Yuffie isn't the scouting set, and Barrett isn't the aiming set of the first tier of Beyond the Livestream. Though, maybe they're just going to follow specific FF7 related themes for each tier. I could easily see the first tier being Shinra grunts, so you get different kinds of armor depending on which. The second tier probably being something like the Turks or the Shinra Elite. And then the final tier being either every party member they haven't used already. I would absolutely love Sid's outfit as a maiming set, and just his spear in general, honestly. And then just either humanoid boss outfits, probably Sephiroth's outfit for something. But then I realized, wait, Revelation is doing job changes with unique job outfits. There's probably going to be a whole bunch of those there too, especially if that last tier is coming out after Revelation and is primarily inspired by things included in that game specifically. Like, people love White Mage Tifa. That is probably a shoo-in for the final tier's healing set. As far as I'm concerned, though, I don't really care what things from 7 the outfits are based on, as long as they are actually good, because Abyssos was the last raid tier to actually have good outfits, and I'm gonna be real, they didn't really choose some of the best ones from 11 for Echoes of Vana'diel 2, so we're kind of looking at the first Endwalker Alliance raid for good those as well. Just please make the gear good looking. Ava and FF7 have a lot of iconic outfits. Just do those and integrate them into 14, but, well, the good news is the weapons are going to be in a pretty good place, at least the ones that have party member equivalents, because obviously we're finally getting the Buster Sword as a Dark Knight weapon from the first Savage tier. Then they're probably going to use the Ultima weapon for the final tier and just pick one of Cloud's other weapons as the second tier one. Do the exact same thing with Aerith weapons for White Mage, the exact same thing with Tifa weapons for Monk. Not sure what you do for the first 2 tiers with Samurai, but a properly shrunken down Masamune is obviously going to be the final tier weapon for that. You can probably turn some of Barrett's guns into machinist weapons if you try hard enough. You can probably turn Kate Sith's weapons into Picto weapons in some weird way. I'm guessing one of the Red Mage weapons is going to be Rufus's cane. I don't know, I'm pretty sold on the weapons being good already, but I think I'm going to need to see what themes they go for the armor before I can tell whether or not I'm going to actually like it. Also, good, Barrett's gun is a fashion accessory. You obviously couldn't turn that into a weapon for any of the 14 jobs, so I'm glad they had a way to put it in there. It looks like it's going to be one with a special overworld action, so if you just press the first hotbar button, you'll actually do the animation of firing out of the gun. Even better, no notes there. Only thing I have to say, though, is, what would they have done if Barrett was a lefty? Would they have just put the gun on the right hand? Or, I'm just saying, they're increasing character creator options and adding animation skins. I think this would be a really good time to allow you to choose your character's handedness and simply mirror every action animation if you want them to be a lefty. There's no way it's harder to implement that than some of the other back-end changes they've been making recently, right? Then they announced the Switch 2 release date is August 4th, and come on, that's gonna be like tomorrow by the time I finally get this entire video edited. Remember what I just said about OC and Xenoblade 2 dropping at about the same time? I wanted to be part of the first all Switch 2 Kefka clear, but that's probably going to be a re-clear party, and there's no way I'm even getting my first clear done by then, given all the other things I need to play and all the other content I need to make about that stuff. Final Fantasy XIV hates me specifically, and that's why I'm so mad and complain about things all the time. I'm not just someone who's deeply critical who likes to make things he likes better. Trust me, I talk about Xenoblade games like this too, and that's the series my channel is actually about. Anyway, I guess I'm just gonna have to settle for waiting until the cross-DC thing is added to NA and be the first Kefka re-clear where the party leader is hosting it from Dynamis, where it's not just a static where the leader is on Dynamis. Yeah, it really isn't as impressive as the Switch 2 thing, is it? Anyway, thank you once again to Nintendo for making the process of buying a subscription for the Switch 2 version of 14 more convoluted, and also forcing people to pay a second subscription just to play on their platform because they want a bigger cut of things. So yeah, in case you can't tell, I'm probably not going to be using the Switch 2 version after the free trial period. I have a laptop that was able to at least play 14 well enough to do some Anabasios re-clears back when that was relevant. Haven't tried 14 on it since the Dawntrail graphics update, but I'd still much rather take my chances with that than have to pay a second subscription to use the Switch 2 as my portable 14 machine. The last thing shown off is the special edition for Evercold. I'm sure so many people are being extremely normal about the Amano art of Meteor that is so androgynous I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be him or Zero at first until they told me who it was. The Reaper statue has an insane amount of aura, and the worst part is I might actually be interested in getting this because Square has finally started collaborating with other people to make figures, so some non-Bring Arts figures actually look good and aren't ridiculously overpriced for the quality anymore. Crystal Skiltborg, whatever. 13 Odin mount, cool. Entreat Crystal emote, don't know if that one should be a paid thing. I feel like that should be something you get through MSQ of like the end of the Godless Realms saga or wherever we're done with our own Asm plot, but whatever, that's fine. Ethos keychain, cool. Big tapestry thing, cool. Little Cotter plushie keychain, absolutely adorable, but how is there not a Calyx one? Like, they turned Calyx into a marketable plushie, only to not sell Calyx as a marketable plushie. I'm asking to give them money this time. I'm not complaining about them selling something. They should have sold that. And yeah, that is basically it. This is gonna end kind of on a whimper because I got all my jokes out and this is a very long video, so I just kind of want to be over with it and start editing. Yoshi P did say a few other things in press interviews after the keynote, but later on during FanFest. The biggest thing was talking about housing, where he said that 2 upgrades he can't talk about yet are coming during Evercold. The first is a UI upgrade. Obviously, they didn't have anything prepared for that, so they didn't show it here. That's good. 14 needs a lot of UI upgrades. I think that's the thing that it actually feels most dated in. And then, secondly, he said that another thing that a lot of people are looking forward to is also coming. And it better be just make it good. I don't really know. Like, yeah, I think the outfits and the customization in outfits in 14 is better than WoW. And a lot of the ways you can customize your house is better than WoW. But also, do the way housing works the same way as WoW, and do the way glamour works the same way transmog works in WoW. It's not that hard, just do that and you'll be good. I know there are system limitations behind that, but Jesus Christ, fix glamour. I don't know, that is all I have to say. I'm going to take a very long break, probably gulp down an entire bottle of honey featuring a little bit of tea, and play as much Northhorn as I can before passing out, and then as soon as I wake up, edit this entire monstrosity. So until next time, which is probably going to be a Xenoblade video, so I'm not sure you're even going to want to watch it, this is Luxon, signing off.